So what's your favorite subject?
She was a struggling single mom doing everything she could.
You guys want to play a game?
Yeah.
She was dedicated to her children.
She showed them that she loved them.
To see her evolve into a mother was a beautiful thing.
Until it all came to a horrific end.
It was a bloodied crime scene.
One of the worst cases I've ever looked at.
Who does this?
Was it the father of her oldest?
He was hustling.
He was always in and out of jail.
Was it the married man who'd been keeping her a secret?
There has to be an underlying personality disorder there to live a double lifestyle.
Do you want to tell me why I got a call today from your wife?
You throw infidelity into the mix, and that complicates things.
So how many you mess around with?
Or was it the new man in her life?
Not only is it the capital, but it is a college town with numerous campuses in the area.
Mostly it's a nice, tranquil community, great place to raise a family.
But for one Tallahassee family, this Saturday is anything but tranquil.
Hey, it's Brandy. Leave a message.
Hey, Brandy, it's Mom again. Give me a call when you get this.
Brandy's family members hadn't heard from her, which was very unusual.
Her mother was starting to feel that unsettling feeling.
And as her worry grows, Brandy's mother makes another call.
Brandy's mother called a neighbor who lived across the street.
She had her go over and see if she was all right.
It's probably nothing, but...
It's no problem at all. I was just walking out the door anyway. I'm gonna call you back, okay?
That intuition is not something that is easily ignored.
When the neighbor gets to Brandy's house, her mother's intuition proves correct.
Brandy?
She looked through the window and saw Brandy Peters' body there in the foyer.
Brandy!
27-year-old Brandy Peters grew up in a tight-knit family.
She was very family-oriented. Loved the family.
They spent a lot of time together. She was definitely very loved.
You could even say she was a little spoiled.
She was the baby. So I would say she probably was the diva of the family.
She was real feisty.
And she always turned the boys' heads.
She was into dressing nice. She was a beautiful girl. Guys was after her.
But Brandy had her sights on something different. At 21, she started dating a man named Mario Michaels.
He was much older than us.
It wasn't exactly the most stable of relationships. It was very tumultuous.
He was always in and out of jail.
But when Mario wasn't behind bars, there was little doubt they were in love.
They had a good relationship.
They also had 2 children together, twin girls.
She took on that motherly role. She loved them.
But with Mario frequently out of the picture, Brandy was often raising the kids on her own.
It was very difficult for Brandy.
Because it's a struggle doing it by yourself.
What she needed was someone she could depend on. Someone who wasn't Mario.
She was looking for someone who had a good job, had his head on his shoulder, wasn't in and out of jail, and could be a part of the kid's life.
Brandy thought she might have found him in 28-year-old Henry Segura.
Her and Henry met at a gas station, traded numbers.
So how are you?
I'm good.
When they started dating, it looked as if Henry checked all the boxes.
He wasn't in the streets. He wasn't a convicted felon. He wasn't living that lifestyle.
He also had a good job.
How was the drive over?
He was an over-the-road welder.
He traveled from job site to job site.
And he was good with her kids.
He had actually a very close relationship with the twins.
She thought she had someone that was different. She thought she had met the real thing.
There was only one problem.
Do you want to tell me why I got a call today from your wife?
Henry Segura was married.
I'm sorry.
The news came as quite a shock to Brandy.
I didn't mean for all this to happen.
Why didn't you tell me?
Look, it's not what you think.
Henry told Brandy that he and his wife were on the verge of splitting up.
That can be really challenging, wanting them to choose you and remaining in that situation.
A situation made even more difficult by the fact that Brandy was carrying Henry's son.
What do we do now?
It's going to be fine. I'm not going anywhere.
He has displayed himself as a decent provider, father figure to the girls, and now it's like I'm having his child, so I have to weigh my options, and she stayed.
But after the birth of their child, Brandy came to a realization.
It became clear to her that he had no intention of leaving his wife.
She said, I'll always be a number 2 or 3 in this person's life.
Brandy broke things off with Henry and spent the next 2 years starting over as a single mom.
She was just trying to get on her feet.
To be there for 3 children is not easy.
But she rose to the occasion.
She got a new home and a new job.
She was doing home health. She was a home health aide.
She was looking forward to what the future holds.
Only now, the bright future Brandy imagined may never come to pass.
Unable to get a hold of Brandy, her mother called a neighbor to go knock on Brandy's door.
Brandy!
She saw her laying in the foyer. She saw a large amount of blood.
Brandy!
And called law enforcement.
When officers arrive on scene, they make forced entry into the home.
She's inside.
But there's nothing they can do for Brandy.
She had gunshot wounds. There appeared to be trauma to her head.
She was dead at the scene.
Then, responding officers clear the rest of Brandy's house.
The officers had to make sure there weren't any other victims, but also make sure the suspect isn't there.
There's no sign of the shooter.
But in the bathroom, the officers made a horrific discovery.
Here we got more bodies.
Years creating a stable life for her 3 children after ending her relationship with the father of her youngest.
She was married the whole time.
Because it had been a struggle, but she was really starting to get focused on, let me get the kids settled in school, let me focus on where I need to take my career.
But now, Brandy's fresh start has come to a tragic end.
Brandy and her 3 children are dead.
No one had had any contact with her since the night before.
When homicide detectives arrive at the scene, they start by examining Brandy's body, which lies just inside the front door.
It was a bloodied crime scene right there in the foyer.
She'd been beaten and has what appear to be gunshot wounds.
Suspiciously, though, no casings were there. So that tells us 2 things. Either it was cleaned up or someone used a revolver.
And while Brandy died in the foyer, detectives can tell the attack wasn't confined to that area.
A violent struggle occurred in there.
There was a large amount of blood down the hallway.
The children, on the other hand, appear to have been drowned.
The person who committed the crime ended up putting all 3 children in the bathtub together.
who does this? Who would kill kids and then not only that, but drown them in a bathtub?
That's just not something you see very often.
While the CSI team finishes inside, detectives speak with the neighbor who found Brandy.
The neighbor was a good friend of Brandy's. They would go to pick up their children together from school.
She had no idea who might have done this.
Brandy, she's good people.
When the detectives talk to other neighbors, they're just as shocked by what happened.
There was a lot of community concern. This is a small little raise your family type of community, and not that's ever supposed to happen, but you definitely don't want it happening here.
However, while the neighbors are understandably worried about a killer coming into their community, the detectives don't believe they're dealing with a random crime.
There was no forced entry into the residence, so that led them to believe that she must have known this person.
A lack of forced entry isn't the only thing that suggests Brandy knew her killer.
It was just such a brutal attack. Gunshot after gunshot and blow after blow. Law enforcement thought it was very personal.
Is that what detectives are dealing with here? Eager to find out, they turn to Brandy's family, who have started arriving at the scene as word of the murders spreads.
It was just a tough moment that day, you know, when get a phone call saying Brandy and the girls had been killed.
I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions first.
We really were trying to gather as much information. We were doing that to the best we can.
It was tough. This is something that happened at your back door with your own family.
Oh, I can't believe it. I just saw them.
When was that?
Oh, yesterday, around 5 o'clock.
She was supposed to take the twins with her for a sleepover, but the twins didn't want to go.
And that was the last time you saw her?
Yeah. We talked a little later on the phone around 7, but she didn't answer again after that.
Turning to Brandy's relationships, her mother says she never approved of Henry Segura, her grandson's father.
She made me aware that Henry was married.
Was Brandy okay with that?
For the most part.
She was like, it is what it is.
What about Henry's wife?
He went back to her.
She said Henry didn't really come around much after the baby was born.
He would bring diapers over, but he couldn't really be involved.
And the twins' dad?
Mario? Yeah, he's around.
Mario would bring them birthday presents. Mario would bring them Christmas gifts. They did communicate.
But Brandy's mother said she's not a big fan of Mario either.
He was in the streets, putting the streets first.
However, that isn't the only thing Brandy's mother has against Mario.
According to Brandy's mother, Mario was a deadbeat dad.
She just took him to court.
The week of the homicide, he was ordered to pay child support.
How much did he owe?
Around $20,000, maybe a little more.
Detectives investigating the murder of Brandy Peters and her 3 children have learned a judge recently ordered her ex-boyfriend, Mario Michaels, to pay Brandy more than $20,000 in back child support.
Often individuals would prefer not to go through the state. They can resolve those disputes amicably. And it sounds like that was the only option that she felt like she had at that point.
She said, if you're not gonna be a stand-up guy, then I'm gonna have to go another route with your child support.
Could the judgment against Mario have anything to do with the murders?
He definitely is a person of interest.
And the detectives won't have any trouble finding him.
He was beside himself with grief. This man was hurt.
But just because Mario was showing emotion still doesn't mean he didn't do it.
Questioned by the detectives, Mario insists he didn't have anything to do with the murders.
How did you hear about what happened?
He explained to me that he got word through the grapevine, so to speak, that an incident had occurred.
Well, we heard that you and Brandy weren't getting along too well.
It was just money issues. He didn't deny that he'd have problems with Brandy over the thousands owed in child support. I know I owe her, I just don't have it.
He provided us information about Brandy, their relationship, his relationship with his daughters.
He definitely wouldn't have hurt his own girls. He loved those twins.
Okay, so where were you last night?
With my girlfriend at a motel.
He was cooperative with police as far as giving them information.
Why don't you and I go talk?
Not only was Mario cooperative, it appears he is telling the truth.
When the detectives followed up on his alibi, the motel had a record of him being there that night. And his girlfriend said he never left the room.
Thank you so much.
With Mario apparently in the clear, detectives move on to Henry Segura, the father of Brandy's youngest child.
He agreed to come to talk with us. He was very even-keeled, very calm, very cordial, but that's not unusual. Everybody grieves differently.
And when detectives asked about his relationship with Brandy, Henry admitted it was complicated.
It started off as an affair, and it was supposed to go into something else, but for whatever reason, that never transpired. But he and Brandy were working it out.
What kind of person is she? Spunky. She's down to earth. She's real sweet. She's a cool person.
But he says things went downhill with Brandy once his wife learned about the affair.
She caught me on the phone bill one day. Seen the phone bill, saying I was calling this number a lot.
Henry said his wife had confronted Brandy about the affair.
She just would tell her, stop messing with me and yada, yada, yada.
But Brandy was kind of like throwing gas on the fire.
She texted my wife, called her something fat, something.
According to Henry, that's when he decided to cut things off.
I said, I'm tired of you just being disrespectful to my wife. I said, I don't think maybe you mess around with her.
He had to break it off with Brandy, and he got back with his wife.
But investigators wonder, was this too little, too late?
Your wife doesn't like Brandy, does she? She doesn't like her that much, unless she wouldn't kill her.
But would Henry?
They asked him, when was the last time he had seen Brandy?
I was at her house Wednesday.
This past Wednesday?
That's 48 hours before the killings.
What you're doing here? What's going on?
Just seeing it Wednesday. Okay.
Henry explains that he couldn't see his son as often as he liked.
It was my first time going there in a while.
But he said he was trying to do right by them.
I put myself on child support.
So she never filed the paperwork for it? You did it?
I did it myself.
Henry also has an alibi for the evening of the murder.
He said, I was at home. He told them, you can check my cell phone. Check with my wife.
Are there any other numbers?
He even agrees to give detectives a DNA sample.
He was cooperative.
And when the detectives pull his cell phone records, they confirm that he was home on the evening of the murder.
His wife also told police that she and Henry spent the evening at home.
Okay, bye-bye.
However, just as the investigation seems to be at a dead end,
Homicide, Lewis.
a friend of Brandy's contacts the detectives with a new lead.
I have some information. I'm not sure if it's connected, but I thought you should know.
She said Brandy had been in contact with a federal prison inmate named Enrique Sanchez.
Enrique has been writing letters to Brandy.
These letters that he sent, they were threatening.
Bonding with a prison inmate named Enrique Sanchez.
This girl, her peoples was, locked up, and she had somebody that was looking for someone to be a pen pal with.
Mr. Sanchez sent Brandy letters from the Department of Corrections.
For the person serving time, it helps them feel like they have someone in their corner. They don't feel like they have to do that time alone.
And Brandy got something out of it too.
She's a single mom. She has 3 kids. She has a lot going on in her life. So to be able to communicate with someone and have a connection with someone that you really don't have to make time for, that might have been something that she was able to gain that connection and that stimulation from, but not devote a lot of her actual energy or time to.
But their casual relationship eventually took a serious turn.
Yeah, he actually proposed to her.
Enrique told Brandy he wasn't just any inmate.
And he said that he was a high-level member of a criminal organization out of Chicago and promised Brandy fortune just to marry him.
The friend admits that Brandy was intrigued by Enrique's offer.
But she also wondered if it was a little too good to be true.
She was really hesitant.
Brandy became suspicious of Mr. Sanchez.
According to Brandy's friend, when she declined Enrique's offer, he refused to take no for an answer.
He became a little bit obsessed, just, like talking crazy.
And 2 days before the murder, Enrique sent Brandy a menacing letter. And in the letter, he accused her of being disloyal.
Was it just a coincidence? Or did it have something to do with Brandy's death?
If Enrique was some sort of gang leader, he could have arranged a hit.
It was such a violent crime. I don't know of another crime as violent as this in Tallahassee. Thank you.
When the detectives received the autopsy results, there's no doubt they're dealing with a cold-hearted killer.
Brandy was shot 8 times.
They've also found evidence that one of the children had been shot.
We thought all 3 were drowned. We found one was shot in the head.
2 of those children were alive when they were put in that bathtub, and their 3rd sibling was used to hold them down. I don't even know what to say. It's awful.
To explore the possibility that Brandy and her children were the victims of a gang hit, the detectives set up an interview with Enrique in federal prison.
During an investigation, we have to go down every single lead.
Okay, yes, she turned down my proposal, but that doesn't mean that I killed her.
However, he does repeat the claim that he's a high-ranking member of the powerful Vice Lords gang.
Mr. Sanchez said that he was involved in various other criminal activities that were somewhat high profile. Gave us quite the story.
But detectives came away from the interview suspecting it was just that, a story.
And we pretty much figured out that he wasn't fully there.
There definitely are indicators that he's suffering from a severe mental illness.
And when detectives did a little digging, they discovered he wasn't in prison for anything gang-related.
The reason why he's incarcerated was for sending threatening letters to governors.
And he was someone who kind of perpetually took credit for a lot of different crimes.
With Enrique looking like a dead end, the detectives regroup.
Hoping for a new lead, they subpoenaed Brandy's cell phone records.
When we're doing a homicide investigation, it's like casting a net for fishing. See what comes back.
The records show that on the day of the murder, Brandy had been in frequent contact with a number registered to a man named Aaron Bishop.
So we immediately had an interview with him.
Do you know a woman named Brandy Peters?
No, I never heard of her.
Figuring they've caught Aaron in a lie, the detectives confront him about the calls from his phone.
Aaron's like, what? Hold on, what phone?
When detectives explained, he said he'd given that phone to a coworker.
This coworker had the name?
Yes, Henry Segura.
Which means that shortly before her death, Brandy had been on the phone with her ex-boyfriend.
Murder of Brandy Peters and her 3 children have reason to believe she'd been in contact with her ex, Henry Segura, in the hours leading up to the murders.
It started when they traced the number from Brandy's phone records to a friend of Henry's named Aaron Bishop.
They worked together doing jobs on the welding site.
We were out on the job and I messed up my phone.
He had spilt a drink on top of the phone and the phone stopped working.
Aaron says he'd given the phone to Henry.
Henry takes the phone, puts it in a bag of rice, which is a technique to dry out your phone, and he realized that it still worked.
He asked me if I wanted it back, but I'd already got a new one, so I said he could keep it.
So now Henry thought in his mind, well, oh, okay, cool. I have a second phone that doesn't have my name on it.
Remember, that's how Henry's wife initially found out about his affair with Brandy.
She caught me on the phone bill.
Had he also lied about having a second phone?
Are there any other numbers?
To be sure, the detectives subpoena the tower records for Aaron's old phone.
What they learned could be the key to solving this case.
That phone was at Brandy Peters' house the night of the murder.
Literally on top of the crime scene, right on top of it. And it had been there for hours prior to the murder.
All the detectives need to do now is prove that it was Henry doing the stalking. And the phone records may reveal a way to do it.
Brandy's number wasn't the only one that popped up in the phone records.
Whoever had the phone had also been in regular contact with a number registered to a woman named Letitia Lyle.
Hello?
They spoke to her and she confirmed she was talking to Henry Segura on that phone.
The phone came up under another name, but it was always Henry.
So, why did he use another phone?
Well, he's married.
She was another girl he was having a relationship with.
She was enamored with Henry Segura. She thought that this was a relationship that was going to go somewhere.
But Letitia says she'd recently seen another side of Henry.
He had anger problems.
She noticed how much of a temper that he had.
Like, he put his hands on you?
No, nothing like that. He was just angry all the time.
What about?
This girl, he said she was always trying to put a kid on him.
According to Letitia, he just was venting and venting and venting about Brandy and the situation about the child support. And the fact that he had to pay this money to Brandy for a child that he didn't even think was his.
Which sounds an awful lot like a motive for murder.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
After Letitia confirms that Henry had a second secret phone, the detectives bring him in for another round of questioning.
What's your other cell phone number?
I have no other cell phone.
Of course, the detectives know that's not true.
I know you have a second.
Once he realizes the detectives have caught him in the lie, he admits he had another phone. In the past.
That was a while ago. That was before Brandy passed away.
He used it to talk to girls he was seeing on the side.
What did you do with it? I mean,
Throw it away.
Why'd you throw a phone away?
So I don't need it.
When detectives asked when exactly he got rid of that phone, he was just as vague.
I don't remember. I just remember getting rid of the phone. I don't want her to find the phone. Like I say, I don't see where that has anything to do with this.
The detectives, on the other hand, believe Henry's lies about the phone tie everything together.
He never told police about that second cell phone because he knew that with that information, they'd be able to see that his location was consistent with Brandy Peters' house the night of this murder.
I know you were over at her house on Friday. Okay?
We confronted Henry about that information, and at that point, he declined to cooperate any further in the investigation.
I don't answer no more of y'all questions. I don't like the way y'all seem like you're trying to railroad me into being someone that killed a lady and her kids, which being one of my children. I don't have anything to say. Y'all still need to question me. Can I go home now?
For now, detectives have no choice but to let Henry go.
We never felt we had the wrong person. But the evidence we had in this case was very circumstantial. You had a phone, you had a timeline.
And we know he had a motive.
So, to learn more about that motive, detectives dig into the court records.
What they uncover confirms what Letitia told them.
He was ordered to pay a lot of money in child support.
In fact, he owed Brandy even more money than Mario.
Investigating the murder of single mom Brandy Peters and her 3 small children, have discovered that Henry Segura, the father of her youngest child, owed her a significant amount of child support.
Henry told police that he had put himself on child support.
She never filed the paperwork for it. You did it?
I didn't, sir.
But what he hadn't told them was that he'd gotten significantly behind on his payments.
He's an over-the-road welder. He can have a job 1 month and not have a job for 2 more months.
However, in talking to Henry's co-workers, the detectives learned that he had a plan to deal with his money problems.
Henry had a chance to go to Afghanistan to do military contracting as a welder and get 6 figures.
However, there was one big problem in his plan.
If you have child support payments outstanding, then you cannot leave the country.
With Brandy and their son standing between him and a potential 6-figure payoff, the detectives believe Henry had made a choice.
He felt that he'd be much better off if she was dead and maybe even the kid.
And when the detectives receive the results of the forensics testing from the crime lab, they're convinced that Henry had done the unthinkable to get rid of his child support problems.
Henry Segura's DNA is on the grab bar of the bathtub.
That puts him at the scene where the children were drowned.
Finally, in September of 2011, more than a year after the murders, the authorities place Henry under arrest for murder.
When he was arrested, we attempted to speak to him again, but he didn't want to talk.
In fact, the news that Henry had been arrested for killing both Brandy and his own son leaves nearly everyone speechless.
When it came out that he was involved, it was a shock to think that he could do something like this.
The crime was so heinous that soon after Henry's arrest, prosecutors announced that they would be seeking the death penalty.
It's one of the worst cases I've ever looked at, and if you have kids, your stomach turns. And if anybody deserved death penalty, it was going to be the subject that did this.
There was no offers and no deals.
When Henry goes on trial for murder, the prosecutors maintain that his motive was simple.
Henry Segura committed these murders because he didn't want to pay child support.
It's a need to take back control. The emotional side takes over the rational side.
And according to the prosecutors, there is no doubt that it was Henry who killed Brandy and the kids.
We know from his second cell phone that he was there that night.
And then his DNA being on the bathtub of the house.
What do you want now, Henry?
The prosecutors also argued that Henry's actions that night proved the crime was premeditated.
You have your main phone at home to create an alibi, and then took your second phone with you.
Then he'd gone over to Brandy's house.
We need to talk.
Okay. Come in.
But at some point, after he'd gotten in the door, Henry pulled his gun.
Brandy went to try to either get the phone or even get, whatever weapon she may have had. And I think he started to shoot as she was going down the hall. And then she was beat to death by the gun. But she was not gonna go down without a fight, especially for those children. She fought that fight for her kids.
Once Brandy was dead, Henry went looking for his son. But he'd made a miscalculation.
I don't think the twins were supposed to be home. I think it was just supposed to be his son and Brandy at the house. And now he realizes he has to take care of all of them.
How could you do such a thing? To have taken the life of your own flesh and blood, and innocent children, and the mother of your child? He's a monster.
And you kill your son in order for you not to have to pay $20,000 in child support? 20 grand, bro?
There was no conscience there. He cared more about protecting himself and protecting his lifestyle.
When it's the defense's turn, they argue that Henry is totally innocent.
The defense in this case was always Henry didn't do it. You got the wrong person.
And when the defense put Henry on the stand, he certainly did not look like a killer.
He gets his direct from his defense attorney. It comes across clean, calm, he's cool, collected, no issues.
But the defense's strategy isn't without risk.
We knew that he definitely wasn't always respectful of women. Just looking at the evidence in his cell phone, how he talked to the women he was in relationships with.
He had anger problems.
So let's see how he reacts to being questioned by a woman.
The cross-examination by Sarah Dugan allowed the jury to see the true colors of Henry.
When he felt challenged, especially by a woman, he realized and started lashing back at her.
The switch flips, and you get to see the monster that's inside him.
The jury definitely saw it.
Henry Segura was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder.
However, they stopped short of the death penalty.
Henry Segura was sentenced to life in prison.
The family can finally have closure. Justice was served. It's done. The book is closed on this one.
But no amount of prison time will ever make up for the pain Henry caused, or the lives he took.
This will always be just a sad tragedy. I could never really understand.
Being in love requires a leap of faith. Following someone into the great unknown, hoping to find your happily ever after. But when passion and devotion are twisted into obsession and control, that leap of faith can feel like being pushed off a cliff. Plummeting into an abyss where everything you know, even yourself, slowly falls further and further away until you hit 2017, Detroit, Michigan. It's a quiet evening in the city once known as the crime capital of America. But Detroit has made a comeback, and many who call the community home have invested in the rebuild to promote change.
People are making neighborhoods safer, helping police enforcement to stop criminal behavior and activity.
But in one Detroit community, a single gunshot sends those efforts up in smoke.
Detroit 911. We just had a robbery. Our employee is dying. Is he breathing? Yes, he's breathing. He's losing too much blood. I need you to stay with me. I request the police and EMS.
Police rush to the scene, an auto parts store on Schaefer Highway, 10 miles northwest of downtown.
All they knew at that particular time that it was a robbery and a shooting.
There's blood around an older male on the floor suffering a gunshot wound.
He was shot in the head and in grave condition.
When you go to a scene like that, it strikes down in your own heart.
We had to catch the persons that was involved.
As EMTs rushed the victim to a nearby hospital, responding officers cordon off the scene. But as they dig into the investigation, they will discover there is more to this robbery and to the individual that pulled the trigger than meets the eye. "23-year-old Detroit native Shantae Anderson was a dedicated mom to her young daughter of 4.
She's a young single mom, doing the best that she can.
The pregnancy had been a bit of a shock to Shantae, as well as to the child's father.
We was in a year-long relationship, and unbeknownst to me, I was pregnant.
The father didn't stick around after the baby was born, but that only made Shantae more determined to provide for her little girl.
She said, I'm a strong woman. I can do this myself. I want to be able to take care of her. So I'm going to go ahead and try to become a professional woman.
My goal was to become a preschool teacher. So I went to school for early childhood development.
Shantae leaned on her family while she studied toward her degree.
I had family support. When it came to my daughter, my mom and my sisters still watch her while I worked and went to school.
With a close family and a beautiful baby girl, Shantae felt lucky. But there was one thing missing.
Most young women at that age desire some form of companionship.
She said, I don't need a man to help me, but I want somebody that I can love.
And Shantae soon found love with an old family friend, 39-year-old Leviticus Cooper.
I knew him, most of my life growing up. He was a friend of my dad's and my uncle's.
Even though Leviticus was 16 years older than Shantae, she felt safe with him.
There is this paternal element to it, protector, provider, father figure. All of these elements make it very easy for someone to fall in love.
If I ever needed anything, I could just call him. Without a shadow of a doubt, he was there to fix it.
For Shantae, her connection with Leviticus grew even stronger after a death in her family.
When my uncle passed away, he had stuck around and helped my great-grandma. It kind of attracted me to him.
They started talking, they started really connecting.
But little did Shantae know that the love of her life was harboring a secret. One that would propel Shantae down a dark path, into a life she barely recognized, into a decision that came with fatal consequences. Detectives have been dispatched to an auto parts store on Detroit's west side.
When the police got to the scene, they noticed a man that was shot in the head.
The victim, still breathing, was immediately taken to the hospital.
He was identified as 69-year-old James Holler.
He was the store manager.
Detectives speak to Mr. Haller's employees. It's clear he was loved by everyone who knew him.
He was well known in the area and a stalwart citizen in the community.
James Holler is a war vet. He took up this job, this kind of a part-time gig in retirement.
He was a hard-working man, always made sure we had clothes on our back and food on the table.
He loved us, he loved his kids, and he took care of us. He did what he was supposed to do as a man and as a father.
Now, as the beloved Mr. Haller fights for his life at the hospital, detectives must ascertain what happened.
The employees stated that 2 women had entered and looked around the store. At some point, one woman produced a gun.
And they announced a holdup.
The store employees stated that approximately $100 was taken.
Before they made off with the stolen cash, one of the women fired a single gunshot, striking Mr. Haller in the head. As he fell to the floor, the two women fled the scene.
They got away in a dark color SUV with a back window that was busted out, but it was covered with plastic.
There was a third suspect, a getaway driver.
As detectives wrap up their eyewitness interviews, they receive word from the hospital.
James Haller died from his injuries.
I couldn't take it. It didn't seem real. I was very upset, very hurt.
I was upset and I was mad. The only thing really running through my mind was why? Don't even make sense. For all things, in all places, why?
Who would want to do such a thing to a beloved member of the community? To help answer that question, detectives checked the store's surveillance cameras.
And the perpetrators could be seen on video.
They could see that it was the two black females.
The videos provide a solid visual description of the perpetrators, with both of them, and the getaway driver, still at large. Detectives know time is of the essence.
You've got two gun women that are on the loose, and who knows what they're capable of next.
As detectives fan out in search of the suspects, they will uncover a twisted affair, one that compelled not one, but two women to rob, steal, and murder, all in the name of love.
She loved him. It's just that simple. And unfortunately, life moves faster than our moral compass.
Shantae Anderson is a young mother who found love where she least expected it. In the arms of Leviticus Cooper, a family friend 16 years her senior.
Me and him had fun a lot, and I loved him.
She was deeply devoted to Leviticus. Her love was unwavering.
But after a few months of blissful romance, Shantae discovered that Leviticus had been harboring a shocking secret.
Unfortunately, this honeymoon phase doesn't last long for her. Turns out Leviticus has another life.
A life that, as fate would have it, would inextricably link Shantae Anderson to the armed robbery that left 69-year-old James Haller Jr. dead on the floor of the Detroit auto parts store he managed.
He had a good reputation. He was a kind person. He was a nice person. A lot of people knew Mr. Haller, and a lot of people were pissed.
The only thing really running through my mind was find out who did it and where they at.
Armed with surveillance footage of the two shooters, police hold a press conference the day after the shooting.
Certainly the unthinkable happened, unsensible, unnecessary, cowardly. We're relentless, and we're going to arrest you.
The victim's family also made a plea for the perpetrators.
I just want to say, you took something that can't be replaced. That man raised me, took care of me, fed me, made sure I went to school every day.
You see the family talking to the crowd and, all these microphones and all these cameras right in front of your face. You try to just suck it up and do it in the mere effort to try to find who killed your loved one.
Turn yourself in, because God gonna get you if the police don't. God gonna get you. You gotta pay for what you did. You took a father away, you took a husband away.
It was quite emotional. The wife, the children, everyone was upset.
You didn't have to shoot him! You didn't have to shoot him!
Police released the store's surveillance videos of the crime to the public, hoping someone in the community can ID the suspects.
We need you to call us, anybody with information. This family wants justice. We want justice.
There was a lot of publicity when this particular crime occurred because Mr. Haller, the victim, was a very popular person.
Tips pour in, and one caller says the woman in the video looks like a friend of his, named Shantae Anderson. Detectives immediately run a background check on Shantae.
They didn't find anything bad on her in her background. They found that she was trying to get an associate's degree. They found out that she had a kid.
In fact, police find evidence that Shantae is active in the fight against crime in her hometown.
She was being an activist for the community, helping police enforcement to stop criminal behavior and activity.
She volunteered her help to the Detroit 300 organization. Now, Detroit 300 goes around helping victims of crime and bringing attention to the most outrageous crimes.
So clearly she has a desire to help and give back.
Was this a case of mistaken identity? Or did Shantae suddenly break bad? And if so, why? Detectives head to Shantae's last known address in hopes of speaking with her.
A lot of times, right at the point where you just know this is the person, and then you have to start all over.
She says, no, there's been a mistake.
Believes she found her soulmate in older man Leviticus Cooper.
He's a man that is familiar to her, the stable figure, a man that has been around for many years, who she can depend on and rely on.
But Shantae would soon discover that the relationship wasn't built on trust, but rather on deception. And despite all the lies and prevarications, she'd wind up doing the unthinkable, all in the name of love. On November 3rd, 2 days after the murder of James Haller Jr., Detroit detectives stake out what they believe to be the home of Shantae Anderson, one of the female suspects caught on tape during the shooting.
They do surveillance on her last known address, and they see a woman matching her description leaving that residence.
Police have a photo of Shantae, and this woman looks exactly like her.
They go up to her and say, Shanta, put your hands up. She says, there's been a mistake. I'm not Shanta Anderson.
Detectives ask the woman to show them some identification.
She didn't have any ID on her.
Since she has no ID and she can't prove who she is, the police take her into custody.
At the station, detectives interrogate the unidentified woman.
Do you understand we're conducting a criminal investigation?
With me?
November the 1st, around 5 o'clock, where were you?
I was at home.
The woman continues to deny that she is Shantae Anderson.
Okay, I'm just going to show you a picture real quick, okay? Who is that?
That's Shantae. That's my sister.
Investigators realize they do in fact have a case of mistaken identity.
We made a mistake. We thought you were your sister. And I apologize. When's the last time you saw her?
I haven't seen her since like the summertime. My boyfriend and her boyfriend got into it.
Who's her boyfriend?
I only know his nickname.
What's his name?
Nut.
Do you have a phone number for him?
No.
Unable to obtain the name or number of Shantae's boyfriend, detectives press Vanessa for the address where he and Shantae might be staying.
We stay on Frankel and Stansbury.
Frankel and Stansbury?
Mm-hmm.
Who lives over there with her?
I don't know who stayed there, but I know he be over there because it's her boyfriend.
On November 4th, 3 days after the shooting, police descend upon the address provided by Shantae's sister.
They announced, police search warrant, and no one was there.
The house is empty when they go in.
They had to clear the area to make sure there was nobody gonna attack them or anything else like that.
Once the house is cleared, detectives scour it for possible clues.
They just checked the whole area out. They were looking for weapons. They were looking for anything that allowed them to connect to that crime that they had.
On the counter, detectives find a stack of mail, but not all of it is addressed to Shantae.
They find mail belonging to another individual that lives there, a man named Leviticus.
Detectives now believe Leviticus is Shantae's boyfriend.
The police suspect that Leviticus may also be associated with the robbery and maybe the getaway driver.
Police also discover mail and an ID card belonging to a woman named Ebony McEwen Ross.
The mail belonging to Ebony verifies that she lives there.
But who is Ebony McEwen Ross? Is she the other woman in the surveillance video? The next morning, detectives search information on the two names found in the home.
They cross-check any social media accounts to determine how they're connected.
Police locate an account for 28-year-old Ebony McEwen Ross. Scrolling through Ebony's feed, they discover that she's friends with Shantae Anderson. But that's not all.
They found a picture of Ebony, and behind her was exactly the same vehicle that was involved in the shooting. The SUV, dark color, and the back window that was taped up
is the SUV seen leaving the auto parts store. Investigators find that Ebony has an SUV registered in her name.
Detectives put out an APB for Ebony's vehicle. They also put one out for another vehicle, one that's registered to Leviticus Cooper.
The police now believe they have identified 3 people involved in the robbery.
It isn't long before the APB on Leviticus's vehicle pays off.
Police did pull Leviticus over and they were able to arrest him.
Once Leviticus is in custody, he spills the beans on a romance involving not just Shantae Anderson, but Ebony McEwen Ross as well. A romance that was the catalyst for the murder of James Haller Jr.
These 2 women will do or die for their man, no matter what.
69-year-old James Haller Jr. Detroit police have identified 2 prime suspects in the case: Shantae Anderson and Ebony McEwen Ross.
Surveillance video shows both women there at the store where they committed this armed robbery.
The investigation has also yielded another person of interest, Leviticus Cooper, whom police believe to be Shantae's boyfriend.
Leviticus may also be involved in the robbery, maybe also the getaway driver.
While Shantae and Ebony seem to be in the wind, police have tracked down Leviticus and have brought him in for questioning. Detectives ask Leviticus about his relationship with Shantae Anderson. Leviticus characterizes it as something different than the once-in-a-lifetime romance envisioned by Shantae.
We've been messing around for 1.5 years.
You guys have a romantic relationship?
Yeah, we sexual.
But it's what Leviticus says about Ebony McEwen Ross that really piques detectives' attention.
We've been messing around for 5.5 years.
There was some type of love triangle going on.
I mean, you consider them girlfriends, right?
Yeah.
How'd this happen?
I was messing around both of them. They found out about each other.
According to Leviticus, Shantae was initially devastated to learn that he was seeing another woman.
This crushes Shantae because she's in love with him.
Not that Ebony was exactly thrilled to learn about Shantae either.
They know that it was few. I'm saying I'm not gonna be neither one of y'all.
He was sleeping with both of us, and she looking at me like, this is my man, and I'm looking at her like, this is my man.
These women are having to vie for time, affection, commitment, attention. So it does create this kind of messy system of competition.
Leviticus says that's when he offered a solution that he described as a win-win-win.
Leviticus proposed that they all be in a relationship together.
Because I got love for both girls, man.
Leviticus says Ebony seemed cool with the proposal, but that Shantae had some misgivings, though eventually she came around.
She's thinking, if I leave, I'm no longer going to have this man in my life. I'm going to be alone.
She decides, I think I can deal with this.
I agreed to it mainly because I loved him and I saw the good in him. When you love somebody like that, I have no choice but either to accept it or reject it.
That tells you that he has a command over both of the women, that they would even say this is an okay thing for us to do.
Leviticus is a strong personality. Both the women are romantically attracted to him. and it almost becomes cult-like.
And they're your living girlfriends, right?
Yeah.
He has 2 women that are there for his pleasure to support and provide for his emotional needs as well.
For any man to have 2 girlfriends living together, know about each other, and are totally satisfied and okay with that. Very unusual relationship.
But there was one person who Leviticus had no desire to make room for. Shantae's 4-year-old daughter.
Where's her daughter at? She's not at the house, right?
No.
Her daughter ends up moving in with her mother.
It was a big dysfunctional relationship.
Detectives are stunned by Leviticus's candid revelations. But what they really want to know is if Shantae and Ebony were behind the murder of James Haller Jr. Leviticus wastes no time throwing both his women under the bus.
These 2 dead, right? There's no question, right?
The question was asked, well, were you the driver? And he says no.
I think you're lying.
I swear to God, I ain't got nothing to do with this. I'm telling you the honest to God truth, sir. I would never tell him to do no like that because I love him so much. I wouldn't put him in harm's way.
Leviticus explains he didn't even know about the crime until the day after.
He says that after the crime, he met up with Miss Anderson and she told him what occurred.
She wanted you to meet up with her?
Mm-hmm. And she told me what happened.
What's the first thing she said?
You know, she instantly started crying. You know what I mean? Saying I ain't got no place to go. She's saying I know it was wrong. One day led to another. Before I know it, we came up with the idea of robbing. We went in there, told me, baby, and I shot her. I think like, you killed him, Shantae. Are they looking for you, sweetie? You killed that man. I'm like, man, where the gun at?
Did she tell you where the gun's at?
She said she threw it, that's it. She didn't tell me where.
Leviticus also tells detectives where to find Shantae.
Leviticus told the police that he hid her at his grandmother's house.
When you receive information on where a wanted person may be, you want to take the right steps and be cautious, especially if that person may be armed at that time.
As for Ebony, Leviticus claims he hasn't seen her.
Where do you think she's at?
I'm not gonna lie, I have no idea.
Detectives asked Leviticus what drove these 2 women, especially a once hard-working single mom like Shantae, to commit such a brutal crime.
Leviticus thought that the motive dealt with the fact that it was his birthday. They wanted to surprise him. They wanted to buy him a gift. So they decided, because they had no money, to rob this store.
Detectives find that statement hard to believe. But with Ebony McEwen Ross still MIA, detectives shift their focus to bringing Shantae Anderson into custody.
Police goes to the house. They surround it. They're hoping that she'll surrender peacefully.
She gave herself up. They arrested her without any kind of situation or anything.
However, Ebony is nowhere to be found.
With Shantae in custody, detectives hope they'll soon learn the true motive behind this seemingly senseless shooting, and how a good girl like Shantae wound up on the wrong side of the law.
I feel like if I was not dating him, I wouldn't have been put in no situation.
Of the 2 women who they believe is responsible for the robbery murder that killed James Haller Jr.
She comes out of the home and surrenders without incident.
Back at the station, detectives grill Shantae about her involvement in the crime.
I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I've worked around the police a lot. I'm very smart. And it's not that I don't want to answer your questions, but I prefer just to get a legal advisor's advice.
That's fair, but you know, it's some pretty hefty allegations that's been levied against you. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you know, when you put it all together and it goes over to the prosecutor's office, they're gonna make their decision whether you say anything or not. Okay.
Detectives lay out the charges against her. For Shantae, it's an almost out-of-body experience.
It didn't feel real. That's not me. Actually taking somebody's life. I've never been in trouble in my life. It just felt like, no, this can't be.
People suppress information. If I don't say it out loud, and if I keep convincing myself I'm a good person, then it never happened.
With Shantae still refusing to answer questions, detectives decide to terminate the interview. Between Leviticus Cooper's initial statement and the surveillance video from the shooting, detectives have enough evidence to charge Shantae with felony murder and armed robbery.
They had very strong evidence against her in this particular case. In Michigan, that's mandatory life in prison if convicted without parole.
A week after Shantae's arrest, the search for Ebony McEwen Ross comes to an end.
Ebony surrenders eventually to the police.
There's nothing to hide for her anymore, and there's no benefit to hiding.
She came to the police station, got out of that SUV. They had seen the surveillance video, announced who she was, and was taken into custody. They're not really sure where she was during that period of time, and she did not elaborate on it.
Unlike Shantae, Ebony has plenty to say to detectives.
Was it your idea to go there or not?
No.
Whose idea was it?
It was Shantae's idea.
It was Shantae's idea to do the robbery?
Yeah, I didn't know what was gonna happen until I got there.
Have you guys ever done anything like this in the past?
Never. Never.
What were you guys doing it for?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. I wish I did. I wish I had an answer for that family. I don't.
What do you make of all this?
My life is over. The life that I planned for myself.
Detectives press Ebony on Leviticus's involvement, but she immediately shuts them down.
There is speculation that Leviticus was the getaway driver.
Did Leviticus have anything to do with any of this? So what was Leviticus's role at all, if anything?
None.
She didn't give him up, didn't say he was involved at all.
Ebony tells detectives a man named J-Rock was the one driving the getaway car.
How can we identify J-Rock? How can I find him? Do you know anything about him?
Nothing. And that's the worst part. I know nothing.
During the investigation, nobody came up with a rock.
She very well may have been protected. Leviticus, they went all the way to rob a store for him just to get him a gift.
Ebony McEwen Ross is charged with felony murder and 2 counts of armed robbery.
The police were never able to actually figure out who the driver was or to actually implicate Leviticus more than harboring after the fact.
For helping Shantae lay low after the shooting, Leviticus Cooper is formally charged with accessory after the fact.
Leviticus was charged because he let her hide at his grandmother's house after the shooting.
With Leviticus, Ebony, and Shantae all in custody, one question remains. What truly led Shantae Anderson to pull the trigger that fateful day?
In my professional opinion, women commit crimes for men because of love.
It doesn't have to be rational. It doesn't have to be logical. She loved him. And it led her to make some very destructive decisions.
Has been charged in the murder of military veteran and beloved community figure, James Haller Jr. Another woman, Ebony McEwen Ross, has also been charged in the crime, which stemmed from the robbery of the auto parts store where Mr. Haller was the manager.
They were charged with felony murder, as well as 2 counts of armed robbery.
The investigation also revealed that the 2 young women were in a polyamorous relationship with 39-year-old Leviticus Cooper prior to the crime.
We're talking about a 39-year-old man with a 28 and a 23-year-old woman. In this relationship, this little love triangle, that's not, common.
As for Leviticus, he's been charged as an accessory after the fact. In his interview, Leviticus claimed he had nothing to do with the murder and told police he believes Shantae and Ebony committed the robbery in order to secure the necessary funds to buy him a birthday present.
They're doing this whole, it's your birthday, let's turn up. They want to make sure that they're pleasing to him.
It speaks to desperation. They engaged in this because they loved him.
Both women decide to forego a trial and take a plea deal. At her sentencing hearing, Shantae claims she has no memory of committing the crime.
I don't really remember what happened. It's like a fog.
She was highly inebriated with alcohol and weed throughout the day of the shooting.
To say that you had no memory because you've been drinking, I mean, we've all had a couple drinks, maybe gone a little bit too far, but you don't murder someone.
Shantae tells the courtroom that the true motive behind the crime was fear. Fear that she'd upset her man, Leviticus Cooper, who over the past few months had morphed from a loving, caring partner into something far more menacing.
Leviticus ends up becoming very controlling and possessive.
She takes orders and she obeys.
When you feel like you're in love with that person, you kind of overlook all the negative.
He was 16 years her senior when there's such a substantial age difference. There is an element of control and power.
Shantae says she considered leaving, but deep down, she still loved Leviticus.
Even when there was a negative going on, basically, I would make excuses.
She got so caught up in, I want to please him. I want to make sure that he still loves me.
Shantae says that on the afternoon of the crime, she and Ebony were hanging out, having a few drinks, worrying about what they could buy Leviticus for his birthday. Moments later, Leviticus's friend, a man Shantae claims they knew only as J-Rock, allegedly rolled up in Ebony's black SUV.
I remember J-Rock telling us that Leviticus said go ride with him somewhere.
Shantae explains that J-Rock suggested it was time to go shopping for Leviticus, whether the two women had money or not. Shantae and Ebony did as they were told.
Basically, anything Leviticus say goes. J-Rock knew that if he threw his name in there, that we were going to listen.
It was an opportunity for her to prove that her love was unwavering, that she was deeply devoted to Leviticus.
If J-Rock wouldn't have said his name, I wouldn't have agreed to nothing.
Whether J-Rock or perhaps even Leviticus encouraged Shantae and Ebony to commit the robbery is unclear. Because, as Shantae tells the court, from that point on, things get fuzzy.
We was drinking and smoking, so I really don't remember what happened.
When it's their turn, prosecutors pick up the story where Shantae left off and spell out what they believe happened inside the auto parts store on the evening of November 1st, 2017.
The two women arrived at the store.
They looked around and they only saw a few people that was inside.
Shantae pulls out a handgun and points it at the clerk.
Ebony starts taking the money out of the register.
Mr. Heller came out of the back. She raised a pistol and fired.
A single shot struck Mr. Holler in the head, causing him to collapse to the floor.
They ran out immediately after that.
The women jumped in the passenger side of the SUV. There appears that there was a getaway driver, but no one actually saw that individual.
It's a gruesome picture the prosecution paints. One made all the more gut-wrenching by the impact statement given by Mr. Haller's family just prior to sentencing.
Mr. Holler's wife, she's obviously very distraught, very angry, and very upset. She tells Miss Anderson, "You don't realize what you did. I wish I could hang you."
The judge sentences Shantae Anderson to 30 to 60 years in prison for her role as the shooter.
I was just pretty much numb, and I signed the plea deal and I left out the courtroom.
Shantae's lack of emotion doesn't sit well with the victim's family.
You made a poor life decision. Own up to it, instead of trying to be a little punk and run from it. Or at least show some damn remorse.
At her sentencing hearing, Ebony McEwen Ross receives a sentence of 21 to 50 years.
Ebony was very remorseful. She stood in front of the judge in tears.
Leviticus Cooper also pleads guilty to accessory after the fact for hiding Shantae at his grandmother's house.
These women will spend a good chunk of their lives in prison. He ends up getting 2.5 years probation.
As for the mysterious J-Rock, detectives were never able to locate him. Some of them question whether he even existed at all.
I believe that it was Leviticus that was driving. They could have been protecting him for the sake of protecting him because he was their lover.
In the eyes of the law, justice was served. But nothing can ever bring James Haller Jr. back to his family.
I have my moments where I cry. His presence is missed. He didn't just die, he was taken from me.
It's been rough. He was my hero, my Superman.
As for Shantae's daughter, she too has suffered the ripple effects of that fateful day in 2017.
Ultimately, other family members have to step up and take care of the child.
Think before you go do something stupid. You can turn people's lives upside down, including your own.
This is not how life was supposed to be.
They say that faith makes all things possible, and that love makes all things worthwhile. But what happens when you take that leap of faith with Mr. Wrong? How far is the fall? And once you've hit rock bottom, is there any way back up?
Even though Shantae says she's not going to be defined by this,
she was a hardworking mom and wife, determined to succeed.
Her husband was supporting her dreams.
She wanted the best for her kids and her family.
She ended up pulling herself up by the bootstraps.
She was a success story.
She was an entrepreneur. But now, she's a victim.
I just see blood coming out the back of her head.
They came in and tried to rob us.
This appeared to be a home invasion.
Y'all hurry up and get it.
The husband is distraught.
When the police arrive, he's holding his wife.
He's just pleading with her not to die.
But is anything about this case what it appears to be?
There was bad blood, bad feelings.
People become desperate.
It never even dawned on me.
They plotted all this up under me, under my nose, played me like a fool.
So you should be charged with first degree murder.
29th, 2017. It's early Thursday morning in Lake Worth, Florida, a town of 40,000 that runs along the water below West Palm Beach.
West Palm Beach is part of Palm Beach County, and it's more of an affordable area to live.
Lake Worth, especially suburban Lake Worth, is one of those sort of sprawling suburbs on the edges of West Palm Beach.
It is an area where families can feel safe in their homes or out in the community.
But safety is never guaranteed. A little after 2 a.m., Palm Beach County Dispatch receives a series of frantic 911 calls from a house on the south side of town.
911 emergency. Do you need the police or the paramedics? We need a paramedic here. They came in and tried to rob us and they shot us. You took the keys to my car. You had on the mask. Or you want the gunshot?
They need fire rescue immediately. Somebody's been shot.
He's not breathing.
You can hear the grief in his voice. You can hear just the anguish that he's going through.
Because according to the caller, the victim is his sister, Makiva Jenkins.
Get here now, my sister is dying for her life.
Makiva Jenkins was grounded by faith and family.
She loved her family. She loved the Lord. Church was very important to her faith.
She was a real sweet girl, you know. She was really a God-fearing person. She loved to go to church. She loved to do things, you know, go out and have fun.
It was through a church event that the 34-year-old single mom met her husband, Yuri Jenkins, in 2010.
Both Yuri's parents were pastors. His father was a pastor of a church. His mother was a minister.
Yuri's mom was at a church convention with him, and Makiva was there too. And she had already knew who his mom was, but to see him with his mom, it was like, oh, who is that?
There is a sense of divine intervention. You're like, wow, we have the same thing in common, and he believes in God. That right there can definitely spark some interest.
I wish your mother would have told me how handsome her son is.
Beautiful to stay. To see her face, you know, how happy she was.
The next few years were happy ones.
Makiva had a daughter from a previous relationship, but Yuri took her in as his own. They had really built a wonderful life together.
She ended up putting herself through college. She was so driven to succeed because she really just wanted the best for her daughter and her family.
Yuri helped take care of Makiva's daughter so that she could attend classes, but he also made extra money on the side.
He was a barber, and people came to him to get their hair cut.
The couple also welcomed a new baby in 2011, a son.
But then in 2013, the family hit rock bottom.
They tried to open up a couple of businesses that ended up failing.
They were broke and ended up homeless.
She didn't have a place to stay. She really didn't have no money. She didn't have too much of anything, really.
Until it all turned around.
Makiva attended a financial literacy seminar.
She felt like it was a goal to always be financially stable.
She learned about budgeting, business plans, that sort of thing.
She ended up getting up out of that hole that she was in.
But it was Yuri who suggested she take it to the next level.
You're like, why haven't you tried to go be a tutor or be a teacher, teach people about how to start a business?
She opened a consulting firm that helped aspiring entrepreneurs.
Yuri gave her an idea, and she ran with it.
She taught them how to become successful, to turn their ideas into a means of taking care of their families and accomplishing their goals.
And she didn't just teach it, she lived it.
She didn't have very much growing up, but because of her dedication and her hard work, she was able to raise herself up into a position to where she was actually making 6 figures a year.
She had moved her family into a beautiful home in a beautiful neighborhood.
It seemed the sky was the limit for Makiva and her family.
She was on her way to being a very wealthy woman.
Her family was growing too. Makiva and Yuri welcomed another daughter in 2016.
She was essentially living the American dream.
But now Makiva and Yuri's American dream has turned into a nightmare.
My sister just got shot in the head.
Makiva's brother and Yuri's friend, Dimitri, both called 911.
Somebody walked up on us with a gun.
She has a hole under her ear the size of a nickel, and you see blood kind of coming out of it.
Can y'all please get here now?
We have several units on the way.
When the police and EMTs arrive, they find Makiva upstairs in the master bedroom.
Yuri is in the room and he's holding Makiva.
He was hysterical, just pleading with her not to die.
They actually have to remove him physically from his wife.
Then as EMTs get to work, there's a sudden glimmer of hope.
All right, let's grab the backboard.
She started coughing, and then I seen her start breathing. And I'm like, fight it, Q, fight it.
"34-year-old Makiva Jenkins and her husband Yuri were living the good life in Palm Beach County, Florida.
They lived in a beautiful neighborhood. They were doing very, very well.
she was what many people would call a rags to riches story.
This was someone who faced many challenges and obstacles in her life, but she didn't let that stop her.
But now EMTs are rushing to save Makiva, the apparent victim of a masked intruder.
She was shot in the head while she was sleeping, and she was barely clinging on to life.
I'm telling her, you can fight it, you're strong, you can do it.
As Makiva is rushed to the hospital, police at the scene are already chasing down their first lead.
Yuri's friend, Dimitri Dale, told the 911 operator this guy came in, he took my keys, he took the car.
Took my car. If you find the vehicle, there's a possibility the shooter may be close by.
While police put out an APB on Dimitri's stolen car, detectives arrive and take over the investigation.
Detectives started by questioning the 3 witnesses at the scene.
Let's get everybody separated.
Outside, detectives talk to Yuri Jenkins, Dimitri Dale, and Makiva's brother, Marquavius Greer. The interview's especially difficult for Makiva's husband.
I know this is hard, but we need your help to find who did this.
I'll try.
He's trying to keep his composure.
He is inconsolable about what's happening.
But eventually, between Yuri, Dimitri, and Marquavius, detectives are able to piece together what happened.
About 2 o'clock in the morning, Yuri is in his garage hanging out with some friends.
Usually we'll lounge around, play the video games, just chilling, vibing out.
Although that night, Yuri was also giving Makiva's brother a haircut.
That's what he did, hanging out, giving haircuts.
Yuri's friend, Dimitri Dale, showed up a little before 2 a.m.
How's it going, man? Yo, what's up?
I'm thinking like, he probably here just to get a haircut or something.
But Marquavius was still in the chair when the gunman walked into the garage a few minutes later.
He caught them all by surprise.
He went to Dimitri first, threw Dimitri on the ground, came to me, snatched me out the barber chair. And the whole time this going on, I'm laughing. I'm like, okay, this gotta be a joke. You can't be serious.
Oh, you think I'm playing?
Like, okay, you dead serious.
What kind of gun was it? A revolver.
He pushes me to the side, points the gun at Dimitri and tells Dimitri where the keys to the car at.
And you gave me your car keys?
What was I supposed to do, man? The guy had a gun.
People always be talking about how, oh, if I was in that situation, this what I would have did. But man, in any situation like that, you wouldn't know what to do or how to do it.
When you're in that situation, all that you can focus on is that there's a gun pointed at you.
After that, he tells all us to get up, go in the house. So as we're in the house, you got Dimitri, you got me, then behind me is Yuri and the gunman.
He's saying, where's Cuesta? Where's Cuesta?
Cuesta? It's my mom.
At that moment, I'm thinking to myself, like, what the hell?
What do you want my mom? Where's she at?
My mom must have got into an argument with somebody, tried something with somebody, and made them mad.
I thought that maybe she owed somebody money or something.
But if the gunman was after money, he didn't act like it.
The house wasn't ransacked. They weren't tied up while he rummaged for valuables.
This is a targeted attack.
But who was the gunman's target?
He went looking through the house and ended up in the bedroom where Makiva was sleeping.
I just heard the gunshot. Boom.
Clearly could have been a mistaken identity, not knowing, just saw a female in the bed, so assumed that was Quest.
After that, the intruder fled.
He ran downstairs, and I run into the room, and you see blood. So as I'm seeing that, Yuri told me to call 911.
Call 911! Call 911!
The husband, who was trying to save her life, pressing against the wound.
Wake up.
He was holding her head, trying to make sure she's okay, talking to her like, Kiva, you know, I can't do this without you.
What am I gonna tell our kids?
Kids?
Fortunately, Yuri informed detectives that their children had been staying with his parents and were nowhere near the crime scene.
At the end of the interviews, detectives see no reason to doubt anyone's story.
Everybody's story's consistent as to what happened in the house.
Now all detectives have to do is find the shooter. And it's not long after they finish the interviews that they get their first big break.
Demetri's stolen car was found less than a mile from Makiva's house.
The person who drove didn't go very far with it.
They found the car.
If there's any fingerprints or evidence in the vehicle, it's going to be important to this case.
While CSIs impound the car and begin to process it for forensics, the detectives receive word from the hospital. Makiva has died in surgery.
I just felt like dying myself. And I just blamed myself. You know, I just kind of beat myself up. I should have died in that house with Makiva.
Despite the family's grief, the detectives ask Makiva's mother to come in for a statement the following morning.
Why was this guy asking for Cuesta? We need to find out what's going on.
But there's little she can tell them.
Why would anybody be looking for me?
There's nothing to indicate that this house is where she lives.
You didn't owe anybody any money.
Have any problems with anyone at all?
No, no one.
Instead, Makiva's mother offers up another explanation as to why someone may have targeted her daughter.
She talked about how she was now making 6 figures.
This was all on social media.
She wasn't bragging. She wanted to encourage people.
But did Makiva end up doing the opposite?
People watching these posts could be jealous of her success.
2 motives for murder is jealousy and money.
Detectives investigating the murder of Makiva Jenkins have learned that the 34-year-old business consultant was killed soon after posting online about her financial success.
Makiva had done very well for herself, and she had no problem posting about it.
She talked about how she started with nothing and became successful.
The post was meant to be very encouraging. Basically, she was like, if I can do it, you can do it too.
But now detectives wonder if someone took Makiva's post the wrong way.
Social media always causes a lot of jealousy, especially among friends, because not everybody's able to get out of the old neighborhood and improve their lifestyle.
Police had to consider whether the killer could be a client.
When you look at somebody's business practice, you're looking for some unhappy customers. And in business, there's always going to be 1 or 2 people that are unhappy with your services.
They looked at whether or not she had promised to set up someone's business and it didn't go the way they wanted it to go.
After police interviewed Makiva's mother, they started looking into Makiva's business to find if there were any disgruntled clients that may have had a motive to want to take revenge.
When they look into Makiva Jenkins' financial dealings and her business dealings, they don't really find anything wrong.
But when detectives scroll through Makiva's social media accounts, they do find something interesting.
There was some heated exchanges between Makiva and another woman.
Her name is Courtney Bell.
Courtney was the mother of Yuri's daughter from before Makiva and Yuri met.
She had some very, very negative, nasty things to say about Makiva Jenkins.
Courtney was disparaging and really ridiculing Makiva. It was brutal.
When you post trashing someone who is murdered a very short time later, it's only natural that you're going to become suspect number 1.
From the posts, it appears that Courtney may have had reason to resent Makiva and Yuri's success.
He owed back child support to her over $10,000. And when somebody is owed money, feels like they've been left out, and now somebody posts how well they're doing, that automatically would be a trigger point to set off somebody's anger.
There's one problem with the theory, though.
The police knew for sure that she was not the shooter. As the shooter was a male, she did not fit the description.
That does not mean that she was not involved in some way.
When detectives bring Courtney in for questioning, she doesn't deny making the social media posts.
Courtney was honest about the fact that she does not like Makiva Jenkins.
She's always talking about how much money she's got.
However, that isn't the only reason she resents Makiva.
She is upset about the lack of a relationship between her child and the child's father, Yuri Jenkins.
If it wasn't for her, we'd still be together.
However, Courtney denies any involvement in Makiva's murder.
She said she had absolutely nothing to do with Makiva's death, and she would not want anything bad to happen to her.
The detectives can't be certain, though, and after talking to Courtney, they subpoena her cell phone records.
They want to see who she's spoken to during that time period. Are there messages going back and forth with someone?
Then, while waiting to hear back from Courtney's cell provider, detectives review the requested surveillance footage from Makiva's neighborhood.
The police received surveillance videos from other homes in the area, trying to see where the shooter may have came from. Were they alone?
Video from around the time of the murder shows a black SUV entering the neighborhood.
The black SUV entered the neighborhood roughly around the same time that Dimitri came into the neighborhood. They believed he may have been followed by this vehicle.
What was he doing there? Why was that person there? Did somebody get dropped off? That all of a sudden becomes your new lead.
But after reviewing more footage, the lead goes nowhere.
At some point, the black SUV stops at a different house and eventually it just goes on its way. That leads police to believe that the black SUV had nothing to do with the crime.
However, the SUV isn't all that the cameras caught on tape. The footage records Dimitri driving into the neighborhood in the car the killer would later use for his getaway.
Dimitri Dale's vehicle, moments before it gets to Makiva Jenkins' house, it stops for some reason.
A few seconds later, the detectives have the answer.
There appears to be someone getting out of the passenger side.
Someone is with Dimitri.
The footage is very grainy, so it's really difficult to make out who the person was.
But one thing is crystal clear.
There's something that Dimitri's not telling them.
Detectives investigating Makiva Jenkins' murder have just found video of Dimitri Dale dropping someone off a few doors down from the crime scene.
This mystery person immediately raises alarms.
Dimitri never mentioned that there was someone else with him while he was driving to Yuri and Makiva's house.
However, before bringing Dimitri in for further questioning, detectives received the forensic report on his stolen car.
The shooters described taking the vehicle.
Unfortunately, CSI didn't find any usable prints that could help identify the shooter.
But they don't come away completely empty-handed.
When they searched the car, they found receipts from fast food restaurants.
There were receipts on the day of the murder.
Hoping to learn the identity of Dimitri's passenger, detectives subpoena the security footage from the fast food restaurant.
We're gonna have security cameras, and they're looking to see if they can identify anybody else in the car.
When the police look at the footage from the drive-thru, they notice that there was a gentleman in the car with Dimitri.
One video even shows the man getting out of the car.
It was about 10:30 at night, and you see on camera a black male get out of the vehicle and help push the car out of the drive-thru.
They don't know whether it's broken down or it's out of gas, but there's Dimitri Dale, and there's a mystery individual, roughly 4 hours before the murder of Makiva Jenkins.
Ready to confront Dimitri, detectives bring him to the station for a second interview. But if that's the case, who was the man on the surveillance footage seen exiting his car inside Makiva's neighborhood?
Why is it that Dimitri failed to mention this person's name when he was questioned initially?
They're asking themselves, what motive does Dimitri Dale have to want to end the life of Makiva Jenkins?
After Dimitri's second interview, the detectives bring 21-year-old Jovan Joseph in for questioning.
They want to talk to him and find out exactly what he knows and precisely what is his involvement here.
Jovan says, yeah, I was over there earlier.
Dude told me he cut hair.
Yuri?
Yeah, that's his name.
Jovan was a relative unknown. He appeared to be a stranger to Makiva Jenkins.
He also confirms that Dimitri gave him a ride home around 10 o'clock.
He actually has an alibi. He said that he was at the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning visiting a friend.
He tells them that was what I was doing at the time of Makiva Jenkins's murder.
But when detectives follow up with the hospital, his alibi isn't so airtight.
There is a record of Jovan Joseph visiting a friend at the hospital.
However, according to the visitor log, he signed in at 3 o'clock that morning, not 2.
This is about an hour after the murder had occurred.
He's lying, and the question remains, where was he?
Police begin to suspect that there's more to the story with Dimitri and Jovan.
Looking for some answers, the detectives ask Makiva's brother, Marquavius, to also come back in for another interview.
Now, what can you tell us about Jovan Joseph?
Not much, really.
Way says, I don't know Jovan, but he was at the home earlier that day.
Dimitri had a friend that came over, ended up getting a hot top fade.
There's something funny about it, though, something I've been thinking about.
They were talking amongst each other. Yuri, Dimitri, and Jovan. I'm in the garage playing the game, and I just see them all huddled up.
When they were leaving, Dimitri and the other dude went out to the car.
Yuri was leaned over in the window and was talking to them. And Quay said that he was talking to them for about half an hour.
So I get up. I go over there where they at to try to at least tune in or see what they talking about, put my little 2 cents in.
Makiva's brother says an awkward silence followed.
Everything just went quiet when I got around. Nothing was said. Everybody just looking at each other.
What were they talking about?
I don't know.
Before I walked up, they were just having a full-blown conversation.
Is there some type of plan being hatched?
Makiva Jenkins' brother has revealed to investigators that hours before she was murdered, her husband Yuri may have been plotting something with his friend Dimitri Dale and a man named Jovan Joseph.
Jovan was the man that police suspected may have been Makiva's killer.
Jovan, Dimitri, and Yuri were talking by Dimitri's car for about 20 to 30 minutes.
A few hours later, Makiva was dead.
So now the situation goes from random to personal.
Police start looking deeper into the relationship between Yuri and Makiva.
From all appearances, this was a couple that was thriving together and growing together.
But when detectives get a call from Makiva's friend, Natasha Williams, a different picture of the couple's relationship starts to emerge.
They start to see that there were some issues in the relationship.
Makiva had confided in Natasha that Yuri had cheated on her with different women.
Natasha Williams said he had been cheating on her for years.
Until, according to Natasha, Makiva finally had enough.
She started distancing herself from her husband emotionally. She started holding back from him financially.
She wants out of the relationship. She was planning on getting a divorce.
Could that be the motive behind her murder?
Makiva was the breadwinner in this marriage. She had a lucrative business. So if Makiva were to divorce Yuri, that gravy train would go dry.
Everything that you've known for the last 6 years of your life is now being threatened.
According to Natasha, that may not have been Yuri's only motive to murder Makiva.
She was pregnant with another child.
Makiva, a mother of 3, about to become a mother of 4.
Natasha said that the pregnancy had put Makiva's divorce plans on hold.
The fact that she wanted a divorce but decided to stay with her husband because they were expecting another child was a testament to how important she thought family was and how much she was willing to endure for the sake of trying to keep her family together.
But Natasha says Yuri didn't see things the same way.
When Yuri found out that Makiva was expecting again, he was not happy about that.
If she had the baby and then they ended up getting a divorce, he would have to pay more in child support.
He was already struggling to pay child support to Courtney's baby.
I didn't know. I don't even think my grandmom or my mom knew. I definitely didn't know until after the fact. I'm like, oh, whoever did this, man, they really just gotta pay.
This young woman who is carrying this developing life in her body, and she's fighting for life for over 3 hours in the hospital after being shot in the head and tragically losing her. That is extremely difficult because you lose her and you lose that child. That is a tremendous loss for her family.
There's a loss of so much potential life, potential future. And when the death happens before a baby is born or when a child is very young, that feeling is even greater.
Being a veteran homicide detective, that's the worst feeling in the world. You have an unborn baby that had nothing to do with anything, and now is an innocent victim. It motivates you to get even closer to find out who would shoot a pregnant female and take the life of an unborn baby.
But does that mean Yuri was behind the murder? When the detectives dig deeper into the couple's financials, they find yet another reason Yuri might have wanted Makiva dead.
Police discover that there was a $500,000 life insurance policy that Makiva Jenkins had taken out. $500,000 can be a pretty good motive for someone to commit a crime.
Hoping to confirm Yuri was after a big payday, detectives reach out to the insurance company.
When police actually looked into the policy, they found out that Makiva had changed the beneficiary information and made her grandmother the beneficiary.
Yuri thought that this $500,000 policy had him as a beneficiary.
He contacted the company about getting his money, and he was shocked when they told him that he's not the beneficiary.
When he's told he's not the beneficiary, he says, wow. And then he asks who the beneficiary was.
They told him, we can't reveal that information. And his response was, there's no way she could have changed it in time.
That's not a normal reaction for somebody calling about a beneficiary on a life insurance policy. That's a confession.
Now convinced that Yuri was behind Makiva's murder, detectives still need more evidence to file formal charges against him.
The detectives subpoenaed cell phone records from both Yuri Jenkins and Jovan Joseph, hoping to tie them together.
According to the phone records, there was no direct contact between Yuri and the suspected shooter.
That didn't mean Yuri and Jovan wasn't in communication in some kind of way.
The phone records showed that there was just constant communication between Yuri and Dimitri and Jovan.
Based on the records, detectives figured that Dimitri acted as the go-between.
The records also reveal that Yuri isn't exactly a grieving widower.
4 days after the murder of his wife, Yuri had text messages between him and Courtney, his baby's mother, already talking about how good the sex was between the two of them. His wife had just been murdered, and he's already talking about sex.
When detectives turned to Jovan's phone records, they put him at the scene of the crime.
Cell phone records show that his cell phone pinged from a tower a half mile from the Jenkinses' home shortly before the murder.
Jovan says he was at the hospital at the time of the murder. There was no way he could have been at the hospital when the cell phone was pinging at the location where the victim was.
Jovan Joseph could very well have been the shooter.
Figuring Dimitri is the key to connecting Jovan to Yuri, detectives bring him in for another round of questioning.
We're going to talk about some stuff. I need you to be honest, because don't hide anything. It's just going to hurt you.
Yeah, I don't have the reason to.
You don't confront him. When you confront him, then he can say, I don't want to talk to you anymore.
I want you to clarify that this is you sending the messages to Jovan, or back and forth with Jovan, and then you can explain what you mean by these things.
Once Dimitri finds out that the police are on to the fact that he knows more than he led up to, he realizes that there's no more room to tell lies.
It's not that I was trying to cover for them, I just didn't want to say nothing.
You said you did.
I just didn't want to say nothing, so if that's covering...
You did cover for them, man.
I did lie. He told the police that Yuri talked to him about wanting to have someone killed. And I was just saying, listen, man, I don't want nothing to do with this. You need to watch who you talk to, because, people can go and they saying you running your mouth, this and that, but he kept pressuring.
And so he put Yuri in touch with Jovan.
Although that was all Dimitri claimed to have done.
He initially said that he didn't know what happened between them or what they'd arranged.
But the detective keeps pushing.
You let him keep talking. You let him keep changing the story, because every time you change the story, you can go back and say, oh, by the way, you forgot to tell me about this.
I didn't hear that.
Eventually, Dimitri admits Yuri had paid Jovan to kill Makiva.
When I talked to Jovan, he told me the truth. He said, your boy offered me $1,500. He also admitted that he gave Jovan a ride to the house on the night of the murder.
This confirmed their theory that Jovan was the man seen getting out of Dimitri's car in the Jenkins neighborhood just moments before the shooting.
Do you know that the state attorney's office prosecutor still can charge you as an accessory, okay, or conspiracy to commit murder on the surface, but I wanted to use you as a witness, okay?
Mm-hmm. He's caught and he knows he's going down and he's trying to cut a deal.
He actually starts cooperating with the police. He began to wear a wire every time he had conversations with Yuri.
In these recorded conversations, Dimitri tells Yuri something to the effect of Jovan Joseph was really eager to get the rest of the money that he said Yuri promised him.
That's not all Dimitri tells him either.
He told him Jovan was talking to the police.
Yuri's response to that was to tell Dimitri to tell Jovan to shut up.
He's like, hey, shut all that down.
Detectives in Palm Beach County, Florida, have convinced Yuri Jenkins' friend, Dimitri Dale, to secretly record their phone conversations.
They was hoping to catch Yuri making admissions about his wife, Makiva's murder.
But Yuri plays it cool.
He shuts Dimitri down and told him to stop talking and don't say anything else.
So the detectives try a different approach and take Jovan Joseph, their third suspected conspirator, into custody.
This is a very important time in your life, but you also don't want to be the only one taking the fall.
Taking the fall for what, bro? Like, I still...
At first, Jovan denied all of these allegations.
I didn't shoot this lady. I didn't do nothing.
You're gonna let Yuri just walk away?
Instead, he claims Yuri and Dimitri are trying to frame him.
And those are two guys you guys should really be looking at, you feel me?
They're interrogating him, and it just seems like one stream of lies after the other, and nothing about his story is checking out.
Feeling the heat, Jovan keeps trying to talk his way out.
Jovan Joseph is slowly becoming more forthcoming with police. One of the things he tells them is that he needed money.
My mom's getting kicked out of her house. We don't even have the money to freaking move. We don't even have money to move, bro.
Jovan kept talking and talking.
He even admits that Yuri showed him a gun once.
Why all of a sudden would he just show you a gun to?
He started bragging.
What exactly did he say?
Like, oh, you feel me? If somebody come test me or whatever, I got this. A lot of people do that. Feel me? That's not the first person that ever did that.
But eventually he starts giving them bits and pieces of information.
Jovan was caught. His only option to save his skin was to point the finger at Yuri Jenkins.
Backed into a corner, Jovan finally admits his role in the murder.
I was really just trying to help him out, but really, to be honest.
His confession gives detectives more than enough evidence to take Yuri into custody.
With the testimony of his best friend and the trigger man, they had what they needed.
You should be charged with first-degree murder. Makiva.
What?
Yuri denies being involved in the murder of his wife.
Man, I would not kill my wife, man.
Well, of course you wouldn't, but you had somebody do it.
He's defiant. He doesn't realize he's been taped. He doesn't realize that everybody turned on him.
But he soon will.
People roll. I'm just gonna be straight out with you.
People roll? What do you mean people roll?
Jovan, Dimitri.
Rolled up on and did what?
They gave up the information.
What kind of information?
Well, the fact that you contracted Jovan to do this.
Trapped, Yuri turns on Dimitri, insisting this friend can't be trusted.
He put together a robbery to rob the youth pastor at our church a few years back. He's done so much little stuff, and it's like I'm always there to help him, to pull him out of the hole he digs himself in, and then now he freaking tries to drag me in this shit.
Yuri even suggested that Dimitri came up with the whole thing in order to rob him and Makiva.
He probably thought that we had something in the house, maybe cash.
Yuri never admitted to anything that would implicate him in the murder of his wife.
But thanks to Dimitri and Jovan's statements, detectives are able to charge him with first-degree murder. News of Yuri's arrest comes as a shock to Makiva's family.
I had so much love for Yuri that I didn't want to believe that he actually did that.
It never even dawned on me that it was him.
When the case goes to trial in May of 2022, Yuri is the only defendant that stands before the judge.
The prosecution cut deals with Dimitri Dale and Jovan Joseph to testify against Yuri Jenkins.
Jovan Joseph was actually the trigger man, but he ended up getting a second-degree manslaughter charge with no more than 20 years.
Dimitri was given a probationary sentence of 15 years for manslaughter.
According to the prosecution's star witnesses, Yuri's motive was money.
Makiva was doing very well. She accomplished her dream, and she was going to take him with her. Before he cheated on her, he could have just walked away, but instead he paid those guys to kill her with her money. He had her killed, thinking he was going to live in a big house with the insurance policy.
There was a policy of $500,000 that Yuri Jenkins thought was coming to him.
He wanted everything, the house, the car. He wanted it all.
So he started working on a plan.
He went to his closest friend, Dimitri.
They wanted to throw police off the scent. They wanted to make it seem as if this was some random act.
Which is where Jovan Joseph came in.
Jovan was just some kid that Dimitri knew. There was nothing tying him to Yuri and Makiva.
Everybody was hoping that they get a piece of that insurance policy that he was going to get after she died.
But first, they'd have to get away with it. And Yuri had a plan for that too.
Yuri Jenkins bringing Marquavius there was part of his plan to throw police off the trail.
He was real smart to have the brother there. The brother's reaction took the suspicion off everybody there.
They plotted all this up under me, under my nose, played me like a fool.
Their plan unfolding perfectly. Jovan went upstairs, pretending that he was looking for Makiva's mother.
They wanted the whole angle involving the mother the focus instead of this plan for Yuri Jenkins to get this money.
Then he finally slipped into the bedroom and shot Makiva in her sleep.
During the trial, when they asked Jovan, why'd you shoot her in the head, his reaction was to finish the job.
The only silver lining in this is that she was sleeping. She didn't even see it coming.
The defense can't dispute the killer's own testimony about how Makiva died, but they have their own theory about why she was murdered.
The defense's theory of the case was that Dimitri Gale felt like he had something to gain by orchestrating this killing, and Dimitri and Jovan had framed Yuri.
The jurors reject the defense's claims, finding Yuri guilty of first-degree murder.
He was the one who set it up, thought he was going to get away, had the great plan, and it didn't happen.
Yuri ended up getting life in prison for being the mastermind.
For Makiva's mother, a life behind bars isn't enough.
It's too easy of a punishment when he's in the grave down under, like my daughter is. That's when I'll be extremely glad.
And the pain of losing her will never fully heal.
Every day I wake up, I miss my daughter.
I could never forget. I won't never forget. I just can't get past it, and I don't think I ever will.
She was a very popular student.
She'd more or less completed that morning her final A-level exam.
She had just vanished.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen.
I remember being woken up by the police helicopters.
The police helicopter picked up a person running away.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
This was every young parent's nightmare. The anguish of where is she? What's happened to her?
Police!
On the outskirts of Wigan lies the quiet and peaceful village of Orrell.
Orrell is a really nice place to live. It's pretty quiet. We've got everything we need on our doorstep.
We have loads of local shops. We have butchers, newsagents, coffee shops, craft shops. So we are very lucky around here. It's a lovely place to live.
I'd say it's one of the more affluent parts of Wigan. There's kind of a lot of wine bars and coffee shops. It's the type of place that's quite a close-knit community. There's a lot of families that have been in Orrell for a long time.
I grew up round here and it's always been, you know what I mean, a quiet place. It's a lot of older people and you've got the style of people what still, so recently, still tip the cap. You know what I mean? It's like an old-fashioned area. Everybody knows everybody.
Most people have lived here all their lives because really there's no reason to move away.
The parkland on the edge of the village has long been a draw for locals.
Oral Water Park's a little local recreation spot.
Come on, doggy.
You get a lot of dog walkers coming here. A lot of people come just to kind of stretch the legs, walk the dog and get a little bit of fresh air.
I come here every day. A lot of dog walkers, families. Just a nice place to go for a change of scenery.
I mean, I've got 2 young kids. We take the kids around the park. A lot of people go fishing there.
There's always students around here in the lunchtime or the breaks. If the weather's nice, they come and sit on the benches. You follow the path up there. It can take you up to Winstanley College across the fields.
With its outstanding reputation, Winstanley College attracts students from across the Northwest.
Winstanley College is one of the top-rated sixth form colleges in the entire country. It draws ambitious, clever young people from across Greater Manchester, also parts of Lancashire and Merseyside.
It's always top standard. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody wanted to get into Winstanley.
It tends to get a lot of the kind of high achievers, and people who do well in the GCSEs will go to Winstanley because they want to get the good grades to go to good universities as well.
And in 2017, 18-year-old Ellen Higginbottom was in her second year at Winstanley College.
Ellen Higginbottom was a very popular student. She came from the edge of Manchester and she was studying for her A-levels. She was an only child to Michael and Kay Higginbottom. She was a talented musician. She enjoyed listening to and performing music, and she also had a notable love of equestrian and horses.
Being a teenager at the start of adulthood, Ellen had a large social network around her.
She had a big group of friends and was extremely popular with everybody at the college. She also had a very devoted boyfriend. They were clearly in a very close relationship.
But life for the young couple was about to change.
It was a very pleasant summer's afternoon. Ellen had more or less completed that morning, I think, her final A-level exam. So you can imagine the sort of mood that she and her friends were in, a celebratory mood.
Ellen had gone into Winstanley College earlier on in the day, and because of Ellen's age, she was clearly independent. So when her particular exam was done, she went out for a walk, which the students often did. She left the college, walked over the field at the back, and entered into Oral Water Park. It's a pleasant place to go for an afternoon stroll. Perfectly normal thing to do. You know, she just went about her business. Nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Ellen had told her friends she was going for a walk at the water park, then would meet up with them after their exams. But she failed to return to college at the arranged time.
With her friends, she was apparently renowned at getting lost.
She sent a joking Snapchat message to her friends saying that she'd been here about 15, 20 minutes and was already lost.
But as the hours pass and Ellen fails to meet her friends or return home, concern grows.
It was becoming clear in the afternoon. She'd not made contact with any friends or family. She'd never been missing before, so it was unusual.
Had Ellen wanted some time alone? Had she got lost? Or had she met up with someone to celebrate after her exams? With her disappearance so out of character, her boyfriend organises a search for Ellen across the area.
A number of close friends and relatives travelled up to Oral and actually took to the streets asking people if they had seen her.
Her family conducted their own inquiries and search as you would. They'd be thinking things like, has she fallen and got hurt or something of that nature.
News of Ellen's disappearance quickly spreads amongst the local community.
Word gets around very quickly and there were scores of messages being posted on social media asking people to look for Ellen.
Facebook and Twitter was going off quite a lot. I mean, I'm only a couple of years older than she would be, so there was a lot of people who I knew that actually didn't kind of know her as well. And I can remember when she was missing, everyone being in fear.
Young people going missing. It's something that does cause a great deal of concern in the communities. It tends to trigger a bigger response because they tend to be more vulnerable.
But as the afternoon turns into evening, there's still no sign of Ellen.
By the evening, Ellen's friends and residents in the Orrell area were extremely concerned. It really struck a chord that a young woman of her age had just vanished.
When it became clear that they couldn't locate her, that's when police were contacted, which was around about 7:20 in the evening.
Her dad rang the police saying that his daughter hadn't come home from college, hadn't come back at the expected time, and it was extremely out of character.
Police take over the search for Ellen, and Detective Superintendent Howard Millington is made the senior investigating officer.
There are set what we call golden hour tasks to do. You know, has the person been injured and taken to hospital? So you check with local hospitals, check with family and friends, it's that kind of thing.
Ellen's phone is turned off, but police speak with her friends and discover that they all received the same message from her earlier in the day.
What we found, it was a Snapchat-type message sent by Ellen, which geolocated to Orrell Water Park. So we knew at a particular point in the afternoon where she was.
With Ellen last known to be in Orrell Water Park just before 2 p.m, police start an intensive search of the area.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
In the peaceful village of Orrell, concern is rising for the welfare of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom after she seems to have vanished into thin air.
It would appear from messages retrieved from her friends' phones that she'd arranged to meet up with some of her friends in a post-exam, you know, letting hair down type of afternoon.
The college student had gone for a walk after finishing her final exam and was due to meet up with friends to celebrate. But she never turned up, and her phone is switched off. Local reporter Andrew Knoll finds himself at the centre of a developing story.
We do report on missing people fairly regularly. It's something that people are very keen to share and engage with. On the Friday evening, I remember a lot of people messaging on those, expressing concern about what was happening with Ellen, asking me for information, asking me what I'd heard about it, what the police had said about it.
As the night draws in, there is still no sign of Ellen. Her worried family desperately cling on for hope.
This was every young parent's nightmare, the anguish of where is she, what's happened to her. You think that your child has, worked hard, got through the exam period, fully entitled to go off and let their hair down on a summer's afternoon. And, the anxiety of sitting exams that all parents and all students feel is as nothing compared to what poor Ellen's parents will then have gone through.
Ellen had been at Orrell Water Park at 2 p.m. So police focused their attention on the surrounding area. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington oversaw the investigation.
So clearly the inquiries did focus on searching the area around Orrell Water Park. Although you've got to focus on where you think that person may be. It's important as a detective to keep an open mind so we don't get what we call confirmation bias creeping in and start to focus on the wrong things.
As night falls, police swarm the village and parklands in a desperate attempt to find Ellen.
On that Friday night, a huge operation swung into action to try and find Ellen.
I remember there was quite a police presence in the area.
There was police everywhere. Everyone knew there was something going on, but obviously didn't know exactly what it was.
After midnight, the police are left with no option but to take to the skies to search the surrounding fields and parkland.
I remember when being woken up by the police helicopters in the early hours of the morning.
It's got thermal imaging and very high quality resolution cameras to search for people who may be missing and at high risk.
As the helicopter scans the ground below, suddenly, something shows up.
The helicopter discovered a heat source. It was in a farmer's field adjacent to Orrell Water Park and some woodland.
The police helicopter, it picked up a heat source of a person that was running away.
Could this be Ellen? Had she become lost or hurt herself? The helicopter crew direct the officers towards the heat source.
The officers came down this path and closed in. At that particular time, there was some kind of standing crop into the field, probably around about 18 inches high.
The search team move into the crop field, and they quickly make a shocking find.
Tragically, the body of Ellen was discovered.
Police seal off the scene, and it's established that the laptop and mobile phone Ellen had with her were missing. Next to her, an abandoned spade is found.
I got the call from the night detective around about 2:45 in the morning. From the way it was described to me, I was immediately concerned that it was a case of homicide.
On the Saturday morning, Greater Manchester Police had launched a murder probe. And the immediate, urgent appeal for information was to be put out there through the press.
Greater Manchester Police are appealing for information after the body of missing student Ellen Higginbottom was found in Orrell Water Park in the early hours of the morning.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here because it's just such a quiet place, you know, and there aren't normally bad people about.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen until you wake up one morning and some poor girl's lost her life.
I mean, I've got kids myself, I've got a little girl myself, and I really was, I mean, all the family was, everybody around here was shocked.
It was very scary. You know, I've got grandchildren, and you think that that young girl, what she went through, you know, what she had to deal with in that situation must have been horrendous.
It's quite scary for everyone. You know, there's a lot of people walking dogs around here and just using Orrell Water Park, so the fact it was done in broad daylight in such a severe manner, I think, was what kind of shocked people a lot.
Since the early hours, Detective Superintendent Howard Millington has been at the scene.
Well, clearly, the main community concern is there a potential for another offence? You know, this is a horrific crime. You know, nobody's been yet arrested. What are the police doing about it? Around about 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd actually deployed to the scene. My priority then was making sure that all the evidence that we could preserve at that time had been, and facilitate detailed searches with a view to apprehending the offender as quickly as possible.
With the crime scene secured and forensics searching for anything that could catch the killer, this popular beauty spot is suddenly put under the microscope.
I came down to Orrell Water Park the morning after Ellen Higginbottom's body had been discovered. It was here the police had a line of tape and an officer was standing there. There was no public access beyond this point. I remember the park actually being fairly quiet for a Saturday morning in the middle of summer. Word had obviously got out.
When I came out with the dog in the morning, I saw the police forensics, all the white gear.
There was a sense of alarm and numbness I think, in the area.
The murder investigation is ramped up, and police launch an appeal to the public.
There wasn't an immediately obvious suspect, and so my media strategy was tailored around that. It was to include an appeal for information, to try and identify any as yet unknown witnesses or intelligence, to generate those kind of lines of inquiry.
Police need to establish who could have possibly wanted to cause harm to Ellen and why. With her phone and laptop missing, could this have been a robbery gone wrong? Or was it somebody closer to home?
I had several working hypotheses. Is this somebody in dispute with Ellen? You know, who'd she been in contact with? Was there anything we didn't know about Ellen that we needed to know? Anybody in conflict with her? Looking at computers belonging to Ellen, her phone, were there any communications with people we didn't know about? Well, the reality is, stranger attacks are extremely rare. The sad fact is that most people who are victims of homicide are actually killed by somebody who's known to them.
Suddenly, Ellen's friends and family are put under scrutiny.
The majority of murder victims are known to their killers.
The body of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom has been found 10 hours after she went missing in the Lancashire village of Orrell. Greater Manchester Police start to look closely into Ellen's life.
In the wake of her body being found, immediately one of the questions is, did she know her killer? In the vast majority of cases, that is the case.
The questions I would be looking for is there anybody who she's been in dispute with or fallen out with? Now, that can be because they're friends or work colleagues or partners, family, anything of that nature. You know, does she have a partner? It transpired she had a boyfriend who'd assisted with the search.
Could any of these individuals be involved? With a list of people drawn up by police, everyone closely connected to Ellen is intensively questioned.
As a senior investigating officer, you know, keeping an open mind and making sure that every angle is covered is important. So we utilise a strategy called Trace, Investigate and Evaluate, where we look for things like alibis and where people were. And some of these people I was able to rule out as being potentially responsible because their alibi and movements and times showed that they couldn't be involved.
Ellen's family, boyfriend and inner circle are ruled out of the investigation completely, which leaves a terrifying prospect.
The reality was that this was a stranger who'd committed this horrific crime.
With a killer on the loose, the concern in the community grows.
I think people were in fear that there's someone kind of walking among us in Orrell that could do something like that.
It affected the community pretty badly because there was lots of lone women that used to walk around the park with either the dogs, prams, stuff like that wouldn't go. They wouldn't actually go near the place.
The pressure is mounting on police to find those responsible.
When it became apparent that this was a stranger, in all likelihood, you know, the responsibility on my shoulders as the SIO, it's so intense. You know, I was in the white heat of the investigation. You know, Greater Manchester Police were resourcing and investigating this as thoroughly as possible to apprehend the very, very dangerous offender.
Post-mortem results arrive, which could offer clues to her attacker.
The cause of Ellen's death was two quite dreadful, very deep wounds, in particular to her neck, either one of which would have been sufficient to kill her.
DS Howard Millington said the severity of it and the ordeal that Ellen had gone through was unimaginable. It was a crime of very unusual severity and brutality.
Forensics also arrived from the scene. and the investigation takes an even more sinister turn.
But this was where Ellen was actually found. A little bit further this way, and there was a hole in the hedge. And we proved forensically, once the scientists had been down, that's where the attack took place, because of some of the blood samples and other material there. And it was clear she was dragged through into the field after the attack.
Ellen's clothing had been disturbed in a way that was consistent with deliberate interference with her garments.
Also, she had what looked like faint ligature mark around her wrist. And there was a belt, which was around her feet, ankle area, which we confirmed with Ellen's family didn't belong to Ellen. It was clearly a gent's belt.
The discovery leads police to consider a new theory.
So somewhere in this particular area, in these trees, and that's where the attack took place. And my belief was that this was ultimately a sexually motivated crime.
A speck of blood is picked up on the belt found at the scene, and it's sent off for DNA testing. The marks around Ellen's ankles also appear to suggest the belt was used to drag her from the attack site to the field where her body was found.
They were, in my view, looking to dispose of the body. There was a spade found nearby. So I think their intentions was to make sure she was buried and not found.
Confronted with the latest evidence, police appeal to the community for information, giving out details of Ellen's missing items. The plan works, and they are contacted by a concerned local.
A call was received in relation to a man acting strangely in certain circumstances. Ultimately, that led us to a piece of woodland not far away where there was a fire. And within the fire, the officers discovered a laptop that had been burnt. Now, we did know from the liaison with Ellen's family that she had a Lenovo laptop.
When the police went to the embers of the dying fire, they indeed found some of Ellen's possessions, her laptop and her keys, in what police quickly surmised was a not very effective attempt to destroy some evidence and cover traces that they'd been in possession of them.
Following the discovery of Ellen's missing belongings, burnt out in woodland in nearby Billinge, the police make a breakthrough.
An arrest was made. A man was in custody, being questioned on suspicion of murder.
The man in question is a 47-year-old from the Billinge area. Witnesses identified him trying to set fire to items in the woods. Could this be Ellen's killer? He's taken in and questioned by police and makes a startling admission.
When he was spoken to, was identified two other people who were partners and were also involved. And it transpired that these two individuals, along with the male that was arrested near this fire, had taken possession of Ellen's property, disposed of it.
Police, they made 2 further arrests in and around the Oral area.
The 2 further suspects are arrested and taken into custody. A 30-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman. They are also from the Billinge area. Who are these 3 suspects? And what is their involvement in Ellen's death? As police dig further, they find no forensic evidence linking the trio to the murder scene. But then, police receive DNA results from the belt, which changes the course of the investigation.
A gent's belt that was near Ellen had both Ellen's DNA and also matched that of a man.
It matched a man called Mark Buckley.
Then I made the decision to declare him as a suspect and arrest him on suspicion of murder.
Police! You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything. It may harm your defence if you do not mention one question
something you'll later align in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Would you like to make any response to that? Anything to say?
Pardon?
Anything to say to that?
Can you let me?
Yes, have you got keys on you? Or
Yeah.
the keys?
No.
The keys are there, are they? Right. Okay. Well, we'll secure your property for you. Don't worry about that.
Police now have 4 suspects in custody.
We're going to take you back to residence now for questioning. Right.
But what is the connection between Mark Buckley and the trio who were accused of disposing of Ellen's belongings? Could Ellen's murder have been a group attack? Officers delve into Mark Buckley's background.
Mark Buckley was 52 years old. He had been staying with his mother in a nearby address. He did have previous convictions, but nothing that would have particularly flagged up that he was about to go out and commit this kind of offence.
He'd been arrested over an arson incident in which he'd set fire to a neighbour's car. There were a couple of other minor matters on his police record. A fray was one of them, but absolutely nothing on this sort of scale or severity.
Despite the forensic evidence against him, Mark Buckley denies any involvement with Ellen's murder. But police uncover CCTV evidence, which shows Buckley heading towards Oral Water Park just after 1 p.m.
We managed to track some of his movements, and what that did show, he goes out in the early afternoon, and it was very warm on that day. He was wearing quite a heavy coat, long trousers, and he had like a green shopping carrier bag. And as he's going out, that looks fairly empty. We then see from the same camera Buckley coming back sometime later. When he comes back, this bag is clearly full. He's no longer wearing his coat, he's just wearing a vest, and he's just wearing shorts.
Despite being confronted with video evidence, Buckley continues to deny any involvement in Ellen's murder. But then the other suspects in custody start to speak. Not only do they say they are friends with Buckley, but they describe how they came to have Ellen's possessions.
Transpired that Mark Buckley had been to the 3 offenders. He had passed on a rucksack with items including a laptop and keys that he'd stolen from Ellen. He had also sold on her mobile phone to one of them as well.
With the evidence against Buckley mounting up, he finally cracks.
When he was questioned by detectives, Buckley, in the end, confessed fairly quickly to killing Ellen.
Mark Buckley is charged on suspicion of Ellen Higginbottom's murder, while the other 3 suspects are charged with perverting the course of justice in knowingly disposing of evidence. But what actually happened on that fateful summer night when Ellen was killed? "52-year-old Mark Buckley has been charged with the murder of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom, after he admitted to police that he was the man responsible."
Mark Buckley did admit that he killed her. He said hello and then dragged her off the path. Didn't give any explanation, clearly didn't want to admit any sexual elements.
He was fairly quickly contrite as to the killing itself, but he always maintained that there was no sexual activity or sexual motivation behind his crime.
After Mark Buckley allegedly sold on items stolen from Ellen after the murder took place, attention turns to the other 3 suspects from Billinge. 2 men aged 47 and 30, and a 31-year-old woman.
3 other people were on charges related to assisting the offender or involvement in the crime.
They were charged with perverting the course of justice in that they got rid of evidence and handling a stolen laptop.
3 months after Ellen's murder, Mark Buckley appears at Manchester Crown Court to enter a formal plea. As he arrives in the courtroom, he cuts a subdued figure.
We went to the court. You just see somebody coming up the gantry. Yeah, it looked like he put a lot of weight on. He stared straight at me and my partner, and he walked to the front, and basically we heard what he'd done.
He showed very little reaction to the brief proceedings. He spoke only to confirm his name and address. The defence said that he expressed remorse and regret to his lawyer for what he had done, but could give very little explanation of his actions or motive.
Mark Buckley formally pleads guilty to the murder of Ellen Higginbottom. And when he returns to the court for sentencing, information about his past comes to light.
Mark Buckley grew up round here. Most of our regulars knew him. I knew him personally. He sometimes used to come in the pub.
I have known of him and known where he lived for, like, I'd say, 39 years, since I was about 10, because he used to live with his mum and his grandma next door to my nan.
Mark Buckley was a bit strange, really. He was a bit of a loner. There never seemed to be that much harm in him.
He, in the local area, was basically always a bit of an oddball, a bit of a loner. We'd always get stories about him, always doing something. In the local area, people were wary of him.
Buckley's past criminal convictions are revealed to the courtroom.
I can go back to August 2012. I got married and we was living near where Mark was living, and we come back the next morning to find out that he'd torched his next door neighbour's car.
I remember walking down that day and there was a vehicle, I think it was a Land Rover, that had been fired, and it was him who did it.
I'd heard that he'd had an argument with some family, to which he basically blew the car up with petrol, etc. And there was actually a crater in the floor where he'd done it.
In 2012, Buckley was sentenced to 2.5 years for arson and criminal damage. After serving his time, he came back to the village of Orrell.
When he actually came out of prison and he came in this pub, he was making out, when he walked through the door, like as a celebrity's come, he was still bragging about that and what he was going to do to people over that. He was still the same lad, unhinged.
Feeling disturbed by his return, the local community had come together to raise their concerns with the police.
People were basically scared of him coming in the area.
As a result, police relocate Buckley to nearby Preston. But despite this, the court hears how he still found a way of returning to his childhood village of Orrell.
I honestly believe that he was saying he was coming to see his mother, but not making out that he was staying over here. So the Preston flat, what he had, was vacated, and then he was coming here, staying with his mother for 3, 4, 5 days sometimes. A lot of people was anxious and scared about that.
Tragically, the community's fear and suspicions around Buckley come into fruition on the morning of the 16th of June, 2017, when Buckley enters Orrell Water Park at 5:30 a.m.
Buckley had been in the park probably from almost first light that day. Early morning dog walkers recall seeing Buckley.
Mark Buckley, police discovered, had been in the area for quite some time. He had been scoping out the area on the Friday.
Basically, Mark was on the prowl round the water park, and different people had come forward saying an individual was preying on young women.
He approached a number of women who were walking alone and then let them go.
Several hours later, Buckley returns home, but decides to revisit the park again at 1 p.m, perhaps more determined to find a victim. By chance, Ellen Higginbottom has just finished her final exam and enters the park at 2 p.m. She had no idea what would be waiting for her.
On that afternoon, he selected his victim as Ellen Higginbottom when she wandered alone into the water park. She was a very petite girl. She stood 5'4". She was very slightly built, and he was able to overpower her very easily.
After the murder, which we believe took place probably around 2:30 in the afternoon, it would seem that he was still in the vicinity of the park. He tried to get rid of what would have been heavily blood-stained clothing.
The court hears from witnesses who saw Buckley in the park that afternoon with scratches across his body.
Eyewitnesses recall him making some excuse that he was rather hot and bothered because he'd had a bit of an episode with the dog, and some of the scratches, which were probably poor Ellen's defensive actions that had caused those, he blamed on getting tangled up with the bushes in his lead and his dog.
2 hours after Ellen's murder, Buckley finally returns home wearing only shorts and a vest, while carrying a bag believed to contain his blood-stained clothing, as well as Ellen's stolen belongings. Buckley then sells the items to his friends, the trio from Billinge, claiming he found them in the park.
It became clear that these people used drugs. It was a chance to make some money, and ultimately some of the money that they received for items that, you know, they'd taken possession of was spent on drugs, and it was as simple as that, really.
And later that night, as news of Ellen's disappearance was spreading through the village, Buckley returns to the scene of the crime.
It would appear that Buckley decided to go back later to try to hide Ellen's body. He'd gone back with a spade, and the police were still at that stage searching for Ellen. His activities in the park registered on a heat-seeking camera that the police were deploying during their search. He was seen effectively by the police in what we believe was an attempt to make a better job at hiding poor Ellen's body in the undergrowth.
The prosecution puts its theory to the court as to what lay behind Buckley's crime.
When we presented the case at the Crown Court, we maintained that there was a sexual element to the crime. Mark Buckley denied and continued to deny throughout that there was any sexual motivation or activity associated with the killing.
But it's revealed to the courtroom that following searches of Buckley's address, police discovered a bag.
That bag was recovered from inside a bin. It was heavily blood-stained inside. And it also, in the bottom of it, was still what I can only describe as a rape kit.
He was found to be in possession of condoms and lubricants and other unsavoury items in a carrier bag he had with him. So we left the court in no doubt that this was sexually linked, although there was no charge of rape or indecent assault, sexual assault or anything of that nature.
And the court also hears further shocking evidence from that fateful afternoon.
A witness actually came forward to say they heard what sounded like a man and a woman having sex within the trees. And unbeknown to that particular witness, I'm confident that that was Buckley assaulting Ellen. I'm confident about that because of the time and particularly the location. The location was subsequently identified as the attack site.
On the 14th of September 2017, the judge imposes his sentence and accepts there was a sexual motivation to the murder. Buckley is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 31 years behind bars.
We went to the court. As he was walking down to the thing, you seen him just basically go and puff down. And I honestly don't think he's got any remorse.
I think the sentence Mark got was really a bit of a disgrace. What he did was absolutely disgusting, and he should never be allowed out in the community again.
A After pleading guilty to perverting the course of justice, the 47-year-old man from Billinge is given a suspended 2-year sentence and ordered to do unpaid work. The couple also from Billinge are sentenced, with the 30-year-old man receiving 20 months behind bars, while the 31-year-old woman is given a 16-month suspended sentence.
It lied to the police, they'd helped get rid of property and handling stolen goods. And, you know, to behave like that, knowing full well what Buckley had actually done, and still get engaged in that, destroying evidence and handling Ellen's belongings, is actually pretty despicable in my book.
With Mark Buckley now behind bars, the community of Orrell tried to come to terms with what happened on their doorstep.
It did change Orrell. It's not just what he's done to the girl. The people going to the college, all her family, all her friends.
God knows what that family must have gone through. Really, you know what I mean? It's not, you have kids and basically the kids bury you. You don't bury your kids, you know what I mean?
I recall Mike and Kay being relieved, I think, not pleased. I think they were satisfied that Ellen's killer had been brought to justice.
And in the centre of Orrell sits a lasting memory to the popular student who once had her whole life ahead of her.
The community after Ellen Higginbottom's death came together and created a garden. It pays tribute to Ellen, her love of nature and animals, and there is a little library contained within it as well, where people can just leave spare books and can take books as well, which I think it was felt would be fitting to someone who loved her studies and would clearly have probably gone on to university and then a professional career of some kind.
If we could identify who had made those bite marks, was it another way of identifying who had carried out the murder?
You just couldn't take it in, because something like that doesn't happen to you, and especially in Dereham.
He had no remorse, he's just pure evil.
In April 2008, an ambulance was called to a flat in Dereham, where the paramedics found the body of a woman with stab wounds and bite marks to her face and chin. What began as a simple murder case turned into one of the most challenging investigations that Norfolk police had ever dealt with. Situated halfway between Norwich and King's Lynn is the town of Dereham, home to 47-year-old mother of three, Elaine Walpole. On Tuesday, the 29th of April 2008, a friend raised the alarm after not seeing Elaine for a few days.
Elaine's neighbour hadn't seen Elaine since the Saturday. They used to see each other every day, and so he was concerned that she may have fallen and had some sort of medical episode in her flat and called an ambulance.
Paramedics had forced their way into the property, where they saw Elaine dead on the floor. DCI Fry of Norfolk Police's major investigation team took over the case the following day and went straight to the flat.
The scene was really quite chaotic. There were smashed plates and things strewn all over the floor. Some of the contents of drawers that had been pulled out and the fronts broken off. It was really very untidy.
DCI Fry needed to quickly establish what had gone on.
It was a case of door-to-door inquiries. Intelligence needed to be gathered around what we knew about Elaine, what we knew about any of her family and friends. anything that had been happening in that particular area of Dereham. Had there been a spate of burglaries going on that she might have disturbed someone? Just a general gathering of intelligence that may assist the inquiry.
While police were making inquiries, the forensic team at the crime scene were building up a picture of events leading up to Elaine's murder.
The state of the crime scene, to me, does suggest that there was some sort of altercation, fight, argument. But it does seem to go beyond what would have occurred just as a result of a struggle. The whole thing really seems to speak of somebody who was very angry, maybe seeking to intimidate and dominate, and really maybe demonstrate power and control.
The residents of peaceful and picturesque Dereham were oblivious to what had happened.
Dereham is a good place to live. It's at the very heart of one of the loveliest counties in the country, Norfolk. So it's surrounded by beautiful countryside. And it's a place where you can get to know people and be known.
Dereham's a fairly tight-knit community. Everybody gets on with everybody, I think. Quite a lot of us know what everybody else is doing. Not always for the good. But generally, yeah, it's a pretty good community spirit around Dereham. People look after each other.
Police quickly established that Elaine had family living locally. Unfortunately, they were about to receive some devastating news.
I was at home with my children when I got a phone call to say my mum had died. It didn't seem real. I just felt numb. After I got the phone call, I phoned my sister. She was at work.
My sister called my manager and asked me to call her back immediately. It was really urgent. At that time, I didn't know what was going on, so I called my sister as quickly as I could. She told me that Mum had died, and that's all we knew. We didn't know how, we didn't know when, we didn't know why. We just knew that she was dead.
I first heard of my sister's death in the bank in Dereham. Everything was going through my head because you don't want to believe it.
We all went round to my Auntie Jackie's to see if anyone could shed any light on what had happened, because at that point no one told us anything. The police didn't tell us anything. No one told us what was going on. We sort of had to use our imagination, I guess, and try and work out what had happened. So that was quite difficult.
Until a post-mortem was carried out, police couldn't be certain about Elaine's cause of death. All they had to go on so far was what they had found at the scene.
Elaine lay with her head in the kitchen, and there's a pool of blood around her head. She was naked from the waist down, and she had several stab wounds, including one that went through her neck. There were some what looked like perfectly round circular marks, one on her right cheek and one on her chin. And initially I thought possibly she'd been hit with the bottom of a beer bottle with that slight stippling.
Police needed to identify the mystery marks, a clue that could lead to the killer.
I've been to probably between 50 and 70 scenes where there has been an unexplained or suspicious death. And, you know, they can be extremely upsetting, but you focus on the job and really put it out of your mind, because, you know, there's a job to do. Initially, with the examination of the scene, it was unclear how Elaine had died. It was rated as an unexplained death. The following morning, when the post-mortem examination results came through, which showed that she had 3 stab wounds and about 50 other injuries, including the 2 unexplained injuries on her cheek and her chin, I upgraded it to suspicious death.
Suspicious death was a term police used for probable murder. It was time to share this news with her family.
When we found out that my mum had been stabbed, me and my family, we just couldn't believe it. We were shocked. Couldn't believe it at all.
Devastated, shocked. I was just unreal, really. You just couldn't take it in, because something like that doesn't happen to you, and especially in Dereham. You know, we were just, totally in shock.
The investigation team needed to look further into evidence found at the crime scene for clues that would lead them to Elaine's killer.
A knife was found on an arm of the sofa near to where Elaine lay that was identified as the knife that had been used to stab her. There was a broken bottle on the floor in the lounge that revealed a fingerprint. There were some boxer shorts still on the floor there, and a receipt from where she'd been to the shop the previous Saturday. That led to an inquiry to go and find out what she'd bought. And then that shop had CCTV, so we looked at securing that CCTV and looking through that to see if she was with anyone or if there was anything of value to be gained from there.
Accessing the shop's CCTV footage and identifying the fingerprint would take a while, so the police looked further into Elaine's life.
Elaine had a son and 2 daughters. All of them lived in the Dereham area. Clearly a close bond between them, and she obviously looked forward to their visits.
Elaine was born in Hackney in London in 1960 and moved to Dereham aged 19 in the late 70s.
She got told she couldn't have children, but later on she found out that she was due to have twins, and obviously she was ecstatic, really. You know, we was all happy for her. And then she had twin girls, and then she went on to have a little boy.
I used to go and visit my mum every Friday with my nan and my children, and on the Friday before she died, she was laughing around with the children, dancing and singing with them. My mum was quite a private person. She didn't have many friends. One of her friends was her neighbour, and he used to visit her as well.
Essentially, she lived quite an isolated life. Her family visited her regularly, and she had a routine of going to the shop every day and then returning home and spending most of the day on her own or in the company of a neighbour or whatever in her own flat.
It was clear to police that the person who saw Elaine most regularly was the neighbour that had reported her missing.
When we first found out what had happened to Mum, we all assumed it was her neighbour because she'd had run-ins with him in the past. So we all automatically assumed it was him.
A planned arrest was made on the neighbour to try to either eliminate him from the investigation or see whether he was actually responsible. That gave the opportunity to do a proper search of his flat, recover his clothing to see if there was any transfer of bodily fluids. Having arrested the neighbour, he was interviewed and he was able to give an account of his movements from the last sighting of Elaine right through till the Tuesday, which we followed up on. And it was clear within a few hours that it was unlikely that he was actually involved in her murder, and therefore he was bailed so that we could focus our resources elsewhere.
One day into the inquiry, it was clear that Elaine Walpole's neighbour was innocent, leaving the police with no suspects. Without a concrete lead, finding her killer was some way off. Police were investigating the death of 47-year-old Elaine Walpole, found stabbed to death in her home in April 2008. They believed it was murder, and news of the crime had spread in the normally safe town of Dereham.
The time of Elaine's murder, I was running a pub just up the road, just a few minutes walk away from the flats that she was killed in. It was a big shock to everybody. Things like that don't seem to happen around here. It was a shock.
Dereham is a very low crime area. There's no doubt about that. The statistics prove it. And so when something like this happens, we can't come to terms with it very easily, and there's this element of unknown and what's happened and just basic shock.
That was on the news, in the paper, on the radio. Everywhere you sort of went, there was everybody talking about it, so you couldn't really keep it private. I used to hold my head down sometimes in town when I went in town, because I thought, oh, God, who's looking at me now? Because I felt like everybody was looking at you.
The police were waiting on forensic tests from the crime scene, and before long, results started to filter through.
After 2 days, the fingerprint from the bottle in the lounge was identified, and it was shown to be that from a young man called Juvenile Ferreira.
Records stated that Juvenile Ferreira was a 16-year-old boy from the Gambia.
The problem was the fingerprint was on a bottle, which is a movable item, and therefore, conceivably, he may have been into a shop, picked a bottle up, put it back down again, then Elaine gone in later, selected the bottle and taken it back to her flat. So the fact that his fingerprint was in her flat was interesting, but the fact that it was on a movable item meant that I couldn't call him a suspect at that stage.
Police had also discovered a shop receipt from 3 days before Elaine's body was found and had been waiting for access to the corresponding CCTV.
The receipt found in Elaine's lounge identified a purchase in a local shop at around about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and by looking at the CCTV we identified that she was in the shop with Juvenile Ferreira. A clear image of him on the CCTV, facially and from behind, clearly with Elaine, selecting some alcohol and then leaving with her. So with the images of Ferreira in the shop and the fingerprint in Elaine's flat, he was obviously becoming of greater interest, but not necessarily enough to be technically called a suspect.
It was time to investigate Juvenile Ferreira further.
Police electric computer is a tool that police officers use every day. If they suspect a car to have been stolen, they will check that on the computer. If they stop someone for some reason, they will check on the police electric computer. If that person's wanted, it will be logged on there, and their criminal history is also logged on the computer, so they will know what those sort of people have been up to.
Ferreira was showing up on the police national computer as having been arrested a few hours after he was spotted on the shop's CCTV footage with Elaine.
Ferreira had initially acted quite strangely in the Memorial Gardens around lunchtime on the Saturday, where there were some people taking photographs, etc., and he'd acted a little strangely towards a lady there. He'd then gone to a garage sale on the Norwich Road, somewhere between the shop where he'd been seen with Elaine and Elaine's home address, and he was at the garage sale there, and again, quite upset one of the ladies there, and was asked to leave. Also around that time, it would appear that he met up with a young lad on a nearby road, asked to borrow his bicycle and rode off on it. That bicycle was found in Elaine's flat.
After stealing the bike, Juvenile Ferreira was spotted at around 4 p.m. on the CCTV with Elaine, and he continued to cause disturbances in Dereham that evening.
He went into the centre of town, where his behaviour became quite odd. He was leering through a window at a young girl there. He lay on the bonnet of a car and was acting very strangely. Several different young couples were concerned at the way he was behaving. And then he went into a supermarket, grabbed, I think, a bottle of wine and ran out of the supermarket. And it was as he was running away, he was rugby tackled to the ground by a member of the public who happened to be someone from a nearby army base. The police arrested Ferreira and took him to the police station, where he was found to be really quite inebriated, unfit for interview, and so he was searched and put into a cell overnight. He was found to have no underwear on, but he was basically laid down for the night to sober up, and then he was interviewed the following morning about the theft from the supermarket and his conduct in the centre of Dereham. Before Frere's release, Frere's fingerprints and DNA were taken.
2 days later, Elaine's dead body had been found.
At that point, we didn't know exactly when Elaine had died. We didn't know that Frere was actually responsible for that. We knew he was involved in this fracas in Dereham, but there were still many questions left to be answered and a lot of detail to be found.
Police now knew Ferreira had been acting strangely around the time of Elaine's murder, and that he was one of the last people to have seen her alive. But they needed more concrete evidence.
The next big step forward was a DNA hit. Swabs taken from Elaine's body had been sent to the forensic laboratory, and semen from juvenile Ferreira was found on those swabs. A clear link between the incident and juvenile Ferreira, and he was now a suspect.
Elaine and Ferreira were from different walks of life, but the bodily fluids indicated she'd had sexual contact with this 16-year-old boy. It was the evidence the police had been waiting for.
So now we had DNA from Ferreira on Elaine, and putting that together with the fingerprint, the CCTV image of her with him, he became the main suspect, and he was put on the police national computer as a wanted person.
Juvenile Ferreira's elevated status meant that all UK police forces were on red alert, ready to seize him should they come into contact with him.
Almost simultaneously to the DNA hit coming through, we received a phone call from Hertfordshire Police. They had stopped juvenile Ferreira in Hoddesdon, and I was able to tell them to arrest him and take him back to the police station.
Back at the station, police began to piece together his movements after causing mayhem in Norfolk 11 days earlier.
Having been released from the police station in Dereham, he'd returned home, and then the following morning he'd made his way to London, where he'd tried to get on to the Eurostar.
Just a day after he was seen with Elaine, Ferreira had tried to flee the country.
He wasn't allowed to get on because his papers only allowed him entry to the UK and not to the Eurozone as a whole. And he then made his way to Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire.
In Hertfordshire, Ferreira had shoplifted, got into fights and robbed people, revealing a picture of a youth out of control. He had been in and out of police custody, beginning on Saturday the 26th of April, the day of Elaine Walpole's suspected murder. Finally, the net was closing in on the police's prime suspect in Elaine Walpole's horrific murder. In Norfolk, all the evidence in Elaine Walpole's murder was pointing to one man, and the police were desperate to talk to him. Elaine had been found naked from the waist down, with multiple injuries, and juvenile Ferreira, aged 16, was the young man police had arrested for her murder, but not yet charged.
Following Ferreira's arrest, I arranged for a search of his home address to be carried out, and in his bedroom, several items that linked him to Elaine's murder were found. A purse belonging to Elaine was found there, a SIM card and a phone, and there was a pair of boots with a blood stain on it, and that was later found to be Elaine's blood. He was represented in the interviews and basically said very little. I remember the interviewing sergeant saying to me that he was very surprised. Ferreira seemed a lot older. But we carried on with the interviews. He said very little, and then gradually, as we gathered all the different evidence together, the property found, there was his DNA, I was in a position to approach the CPS and ask to charge him with murder.
The CPS agreed, and on the 10th of May 2008, 11 days after Elaine Walpole's body had been found, juvenile Ferreira was charged.
Juvenile Ferreira was charged with murder, but as a juvenile, he had to be treated differently. He was kept in a different prison, and if convicted, would be subject to different term of imprisonment. Roughly a third of that he'd be expected as an adult.
Well, when we got told by the police that they'd caught someone, obviously we were, I don't know, we were sort of like, your mind's all over the place, because obviously you're happy that someone's been caught, but obviously we wanted to know who it was and why. So obviously it was all in sort of like mixed emotions, really.
Ferreira was held on remand at Feltham Young Offenders Institute while police continued investigating him, discovering that he'd moved to Durham from the Gambia in 2007. But confirming Ferreira's age was proving to be difficult.
We still had our suspicions that Ferreira was older than he was actually saying. Inquiries in the Gambia with the Attorney General indicated that travel documents could be obtained just by saying what your date of birth is without any evidence, and therefore they weren't a real true reflection of someone's date of birth. Ferreira's mother, who had moved to England, wanted to take him from the Gambia back to England, and therefore had applied for his travel documents stating a date of birth that made him at that time under 16 and a dependent. The Attorney General on my behalf made inquiries at the school where Ferreira had been and obtained his school certificate, but because he'd moved from Guinea-Bissau, where he was born, to the Gambia, we couldn't be absolutely sure when he'd started his school, and therefore that wasn't evidence of his birth and his age.
Not being able to clarify Ferreira's age was a blow, but the police still had work to do in preparation for the trial, so focused on his relationship with Elaine.
We wanted to know how Ferreira met Elaine, how well he knew her, and from inquiries it appeared that Ferreira was refused to purchase either alcohol or cigarettes in the shop and had gone outside and then asked Elaine to buy something for him, then returned into the shop and then walked away from the shop in the direction of her home address with her. As far as we know, that was the first time he had met Elaine.
Ferreira's semen was found on Elaine's dead body, pointing to sexual contact between them. But to add sexual assault to the existing murder charge, DCI Fry had to disprove consensual sex. Police needed to find out more about Elaine's personal life, and they returned to the family.
Elaine would always tell you stuff. Even if you didn't want to know about it, she'd soon tell you about things. So, yeah, she'd definitely tell you if she had a boyfriend.
I'd never heard of him. She'd never mentioned him to any of us, so we were very shocked that she would be involved with someone so young. We didn't know anything about him, or why they would even come to be acquaintances in the first place.
As far as her family were concerned, Elaine wasn't in a relationship with anyone at the time of her death, let alone a random 16-year-old boy. The suggestion was upsetting, and more distressing was that they still hadn't been able to lay Elaine to rest.
One thing that the family found very difficult to deal with was the delay in being able to hold Elaine's funeral. The problem is that we hold our post-mortem as soon as we can, but the defence have the right to hold their own post-mortem so that they can check the evidence that we've obtained. And therefore we have to have caught someone, charged them, and then given the defence the opportunity to carry out their own post-mortem. And in this case, the defence delayed and the post-mortem wasn't carried out for several months.
Having the funeral after 4 months was obviously a huge weight had lifted off our shoulders, that we were able to have the funeral. But we knew that the trial was coming up, so we still had that to deal with. So we were still all really anxious and worried about the outcome of the trial.
Unfortunately for Elaine's family, a new development at Feltham Young Offenders Institute suggested Ferreira wasn't going down without a fight.
Whilst we were preparing the case, we were contacted by the prison where Ferreira was being kept, and we were told that he had written on the wall of his cell, "I didn't kill her, she was my girlfriend, for goodness sake, I'm only a kid." This gave an indication of the defence that Ferreira may be putting forward at court, that he knew Elaine, that she was his girlfriend, and it's quite common for people to remain sort of denying the offence right through the system.
Graffiti more commonly is a way in which individuals make a statement about themselves to the world. It's how they want to be seen. Now, that might have a tactical element in that he's trying to influence people's views of his culpability, but it could be that he's trying to convince himself, because some sexual murderers don't like admitting even to themselves what they've done.
Police now had to prove that Elaine and Ferreira were not in a relationship as he claimed, and that a violent sexual assault had taken place. They went back to the evidence from the crime scene.
A big conundrum was the injury to Elaine's face, to her cheek and her chin. It looked like a circle of identical marks, if you like. Could it have been the bottom of a bottle? Could it have been a pill packet in someone's hand as they struck her on the face? What had caused those marks? So I contacted the National Injuries Database for their expert opinion. And they said to me that it's a possibility that it was bite marks. They provided me with several experts, and I decided to contact forensic odontologist Freddie Martin.
It was now turning into an incredibly complex investigation for Norfolk Police, needing to call on a forensic odontologist, otherwise known as a forensic dentist, to help them out.
Forensic odontology is extremely useful to police and prosecutors. On the crime side, it's not uncommon in murder cases for the perpetrator of the murder to bite their victims. And they might bite them extremely viciously as well. Sometimes they're very vicious biting. And in rape cases, for instance, it's very common to find bite marks. And by examining the bite, photographing it, taking impressions from suspects and that sort of thing, it is often possible to match up the perpetrator with the victim.
I sent Freddie photographs of the injuries, and after careful consideration, he was willing to give his expert opinion that they were bite marks. This was exciting because if we could identify who had made those bite marks, it was another way of identifying who had carried out the murder, but also it helped towards boxing off any defence as to consensual sex.
DCI Fry needed to prove these bite marks belonged to juvenile Ferreira, to charge him with sexual assault as well as murder. The police also needed to prove their suspicions that he was over 18. But with less than 2 weeks until the trial, the investigation team were running out of time. Police in Dereham had been investigating the death of Elaine Walpole, stabbed to death in her Norfolk home in 2008. They had charged 16-year-old juvenile Ferreira with murder and were keen to add a sexual assault charge after his DNA was found on her body.
So the swabs from Elaine's body were sent as a priority, and other exhibits followed later on. As it happens, the boxer shorts that had been found there, later on, they were found to have Ferreira's DNA on.
With only 2 weeks until the trial, the police had a limited amount of time to prove that bite marks found on Elaine's body had been inflicted by Ferreira.
In order to prove that he had created the bites, we would need teeth impressions, and the problem with that is that they're classed as intimate samples and they can't be taken other than with the consent of the person. And when we approached Ferreira's solicitor, he refused. Without the dental impressions, we couldn't prove that Ferreira had caused those marks on her face. However, we would be able to bring it to the attention of the court that Ferreira had refused and therefore an adverse inference could be made against Ferreira in the subsequent trial.
This meant the judge could tell the jury that Ferreira had refused to produce the dental impressions, knowing it might hurt his defence.
The solicitor rang CPS on the Thursday before the trial and said that they would give permission, clearly in order to stop any adverse inference being made.
The police had just one working day before the trial to get the evidence they needed from juvenile Ferreira.
I rang the odontologist and he said that he'd get onto it straight away. He went to the prison the next day, obtained the teeth impressions, worked on them over the weekend, and by the Monday he had positive proof that the bite marks were made by juvenile Ferreira biting Elaine on her face and on her chin.
The new evidence meant that 16-year-old juvenile Ferreira stood trial charged with both the murder and rape of Elaine Walpole, with the police confident she had never had consensual sex with him.
Throughout the trial, juvenile Ferreira maintained a defence that he was in a relationship with Elaine and that he had consensual sex with her and had left her alive and well on the Saturday and had no knowledge of her murder. This was clearly upsetting for the family, him suggesting that he was in a relationship with her, which they didn't believe at all, and it was really the only way he had to go to try and explain the sexual element to the offence.
We had no idea why they would be associated with each other. They seemingly come from different walks of life. Obviously, my mum was a lot older than him. We don't know why their paths would have crossed.
One can only speculate, but it is possible that he experienced something like a perceived rejection, or that she wouldn't comply, maybe with sexual advances. Perhaps because of the state that he was in with the alcohol, or the emotional state he was in generally. Maybe he was just all too ready to take out his feelings on her.
In his defence, Ferreira claimed that on the Sunday after his release from the police station, he'd returned to Elaine's flat and found her dead. He said that he was shocked by what he saw. He'd moved the knife, he'd got blood on his hands, and he'd washed his hands, and that somehow that's how blood from Elaine had got onto his boot. At some point he claimed that it was possibly a drug dealer that had committed the offence, again upsetting the family. And when he was challenged as to why he hadn't reported what he found to the police, he said that he'd gone to the police station but that was too scared to go inside, and so he hadn't reported it. He continued to deny biting Elaine. He continued to deny any violence towards Elaine, but he did admit stealing some of her jewellery.
Having stayed silent in interviews, Ferreira was now claiming he had known Elaine was dead before the police did, but wasn't responsible for the killing.
Going into court and seeing him standing there, the person that killed my mum, was horrible. I made eye contact with him and he stared me out. He had no remorse, he was just pure evil.
DCI Fry felt the prosecution had a strong case against Ferreira, with CCTV, fingerprints and DNA evidence, plus the forensic dentist who took the stand.
Freddie Martin was obviously a key witness, and he came along to provide the evidence that Ferreira had caused the bites on her face. And as we waited outside court, I spoke to Freddie about our problems identifying a real age for Ferreira, and I said to him, it's a pity you can't age someone by their teeth like you can a horse. And Freddie turned to me and said, well, you can.
When you're trying to prove that somebody's over the age of 18, or whether they're under the age of 18, then it is the third molar tooth, the wisdom tooth, that is the one that's going to give you that essential bit of information. You would expect that tooth to start to erupt into the mouth about 16, and 3 years later you would expect the root of that tooth to be fully formed.
This new information was an important breakthrough. If Ferreira had fully formed wisdom teeth, he would be at least 19 years old. But the prosecution and the defence had already given evidence, and the jury were now ready with their verdict.
On the 15th of December 2008, Frere was found guilty by a unanimous verdict.
He was convicted of the murder and rape of Elaine Walpole.
When he'd been found guilty, it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders, and finally my mum could have some peace.
It was at this point, if he had been sentenced as a juvenile, he would have got a third of the sentence that he would as an adult. And this was the point where we approached the judge through the barrister to ask for more time to prove Frere's true age.
A conviction for murder and rape would have meant just 8 years in prison if Ferreira was sentenced as a juvenile.
After the guilty verdict, we then got told that it would be adjourned until further investigation on his age, and we were relieved that they were actually going to sort out his age and so that he would get the sentence he deserved.
As x-rays of Ferreira's teeth had recently been taken to prove he'd bitten Elaine, the police already had the medical records they needed to analyse.
Freddie Martin, the forensic odontologist, went to work on the x-rays of Ferreira's teeth to try and prove exactly how old he was. The really crushing news was that, in fact, he had a deformity in his teeth and the last set of molars weren't even there, and he couldn't prove through his teeth how old Ferreira was.
There are certain abnormalities that can occur with the development of the third molar tooth. The roots can become fused. It may have a high degree of a curve on the end of the root. It may not fully form, and then it makes it difficult for the forensic odontologist to actually use that third molar tooth as a method of age assessment of that individual.
The news was terrible, really. We'd really hoped that that would be the final thing to show how old he was, and it had been ripped away from us. And we were up against the clock. We had to get some sort of evidence to prove his age before he was due to come back for sentencing. I talked it through with Freddie, and he said, well, there are other ways of proving someone's age. There are different bones in the body that develop at different stages. The wrists, for instance, the bones in the clavicle, through the sternum. But he said he wasn't really the right expert to do that. We needed our own expert, a forensic anthropologist, to give expert evidence as to Frere's age through his bones. There was a real problem here because it's so difficult to get someone out of prison for any reason, but to take them to hospital for x-rays is unheard of.
It was another race against time, as police went about trying to arrange further x-rays of Ferreira, now a convicted murderer. Ferreira's defence were also making things difficult for the investigation.
The defence demanded that their expert be present when the x-rays were taken, but the prison said that no one was allowed to know where the procedure would take place beforehand, and therefore we had to arrange for the defence expert to be picked up by police officers and taken to an unknown location to be present as the x-rays were taken. The prison sent him along attached to the biggest prison officer you've ever seen. There was no way that they wanted any chance for him to escape.
X-rays were taken of Ferreira's body, which DCI Fry immediately sent to their forensic anthropologist to analyse.
Julie Roberts was able to say, through the development of the radius of the bones within his wrist, that Frere was probably around 21 years old, but at the very least 19. That meant he was an adult. That meant that he would be sentenced as an adult.
On the 27th of March 2009, after an 11-month investigation, juvenile Ferreira went back to court and was sentenced, as an adult, to 22 years imprisonment, roughly 3 times what he would have got as a juvenile.
This was excellent news. Every time we thought that we were getting somewhere, there'd be another block put in the way, and it was a long journey, but this was the end of the road, and we were able to achieve exactly what we set out for.
The police were amazing. They went above and beyond what we ever thought they would do to secure a long sentence for us.
I think everyone was just relieved that after so long, we'd finally gotten justice for Mum. Although it won't bring her back, we are happy with the sentencing, and we can just try and move on and obviously never forget her and what happened, but we can...
It still doesn't seem real that my mum's not here anymore. It's just like a nightmare, really. You never think it's going to happen to you as a family, but it's happened to us.
She's too young. She shouldn't be there. She should be here. She should be here with us. We all have a miss her.
Thanks to Norfolk Police's dedication to the pursuit of justice, Juvenile Ferreira started a full and just sentence for the murder of mother and grandmother Elaine Walpole that would keep him in jail until what the police believe will be well into his 40s.
Beware the shadows. Who knows what danger lurks? Take the darkest fairy tale and bring it into modern times. Weeknights at 10 on Sky Mix. Grim.
Chịu cháu rồi.
Khoai lệ phố là khoai gì ta? Khoai lệ phố. Không biết là khoai gì.
Được ăn bao giờ ạ?